Chapter 868. What opportunity? Jiang Wang asked. He had realized that he had no choice in front of Wei Sun. Wei Sun said, "You said that you should repay kindness. Zhu Biqiang saved your life. How will you repay her? Are you willing to wash away her sins? Enter the bewildering world for Zhu Biqiang and kill the sea race to wash away her sins." But everyone knew, don't go out to sea until you've reached the outer tower. Without the Starlight's sacred building, it was impossible to grasp the direction in the bewildering world, let alone find the way back. This was also the biggest reason why Zhu Biqiang had to die on this trip. Although Jiang Wang was much stronger than Zhu Biqiang, he hadn't established the Starlight sacred building. In the bewildering world, he was also blind. "Jiang Wang, you can't!" Cheng Gengsheng shouted. "Jiang Wang, you've done enough." Jiang Wuyo couldn't help but say. She had invested so many resources. If Jiang Wang went, there was a high probability that Lu Shenong would end up like him. And she couldn't help but lose everything again. "I don't want to." Zhu Biqiang tried her best to open her mouth and say so, but she couldn't make a sound. Wei Sun didn't care about other people's dissuasion. He just quietly looked at Jiang Wang, waiting for him to make a decision. This wait didn't last long. Jiang Wang's calm expression showed that he was very clear about the dangers of the bewildering world. But he just said, "I'm willing." Wei Sun seemed to be unwilling to see him being so brave, so he continued, "Inner mansion cultivators can fight against general-level sea creatures, but you have divine abilities and a dazzling battle record like killing Elder Hai Zoming. I think you're not inferior to Bijou. So if you want to wash away Zhu Biqiang's sins, you have to fulfill the same conditions as Bijou. Are you convinced?" This wasn't fair. Although Jiang Wang killed Hai Zoming with his own hands, his strength was definitely not stronger than Hai Zoming's. Asking him to complete the same task as Grandma Bijou meant that he had to bear a greater risk. Being thrown into the bewildering world before he reached the outer tower was already the greatest risk. However, no one could speak for Jiang Wang now. In front of Wei Sun, even Yang Feng of Mog Valley and Qi Xiao of Jueming all didn't have enough weight. Cheng Gengsheng was silent and in great pain. He still couldn't figure out what the problem was. Why would a perfected cultivator like Wei Sun personally come to the Tianya stage to participate in this ceremony? The fact that Reverend Cheng Guang presided over the ceremony had already exceeded the standards of previous years. After all, this was not the centennial ceremony. He realized that he had missed something in his calculations, that he must have overlooked something, though the omission was not his responsibility. Even if he, Jiang Wuyo, and Jiang Wang worked together, they still wouldn't reach that level. Without that level of information, it was inevitable that they would miscalculate. But he was in pain. He was in pain because he knew Jiang Wang's choice. As expected, Jiang Wang said, "Junior is convinced." "Oh." Wei Sun seemed to be very interested. "How can you be convinced? This shouldn't be the case." Jiang Wang was very calm because he had thought it through. He was really convinced. "You are right. My sword is still too weak to defend my principles," he said earnestly. "But before that, my sword is too weak to defend my principles. I am willing to respect the principles set by the predecessors. Zhu Biqiang is guilty, of course. The bewildering world is also a tradition. Thank you for giving Taoist Zhu and me a chance." Saying thank you is too fake. Wei Sun shook his head. "However, young people like you are rarely seen nowadays. You have guts and rules." "Very good." Jiang Wang bowed again and didn't say anything. Wei Sun smiled and said to Jinren Cheng Guang, "Since the two of them are guilty of the same crime, they will be punished together. In that case, let's throw the two of them into the same region. This will prevent people from gossiping that the fishing sea tower is not as fair as them." Yang Feng felt as if there was a thorn in his back. He felt quite uneasy. This perfected cultivator was really as vengeful as the rumors said. He had mocked Shinren Chongguang earlier, and now he was even using it to fight back. Jishu frowned and looked at Zhao Wuyin anxiously. Zhao Wuyin only patted her hand and didn't say anything. At this time, who couldn't see that Granny Bijou and Jiang Wang had become mortal enemies? The two of them were in the same area and were destined to fight to the death. There was no need to wait for the sea race to act. When Wei Sun spoke earlier, he seemed to admire Jiang Wang very much. However, his next sentence pushed Jiang Wang one step further into the abyss. He clearly wanted to see another fight. He wanted the world to see if the strength of the Fishing Sea Tower's elders was as weak as the rumors said. They could be easily killed by Tianjiao. Last time, he fought against Hai Zoming. Although Hai Zoming was the one who took the initiative to attack, in fact, Jiang Wang was the one who was unprepared. He waited for the enemy to come to his aid. This time, he didn't know enough about Granny Bijou's strength. There was a huge gap between their strength. Under such circumstances, he still had to complete the punishment. Wei Sun didn't seem to intend to let Jiang Wang leave the bewildering world alive. Jinren Chongguang nodded and said, "Should we send him now?" Or Wei Sun only looked at Jiang Wang, but asked the two of them at the same time, "Do you have anything else to say?" Jiang Wang only clenched his long sword and said no. Granny Bijou also said no. Facing the housemaster, she didn't even dare to breathe, let alone say a word. "What about you?" Wei Sun didn't look at anyone, but his meaning had been conveyed. There were so many forces and so many people here. Who didn't approve? Who objected? Of course, no one. No one dared, and no one could. Wei Sun nodded and was about to instruct Jinren Chongguang. A fat guy suddenly walked over with large strides. It was Cheng Gongsheng. He strode to Jiang Wang. Without saying anything, he took off his coat and personally put it on Jiang Wang. He said in a deep voice, "There are many storms on the sea. Take care of yourself." The wide coat on Jiang Wang shrunk a lot in an instant, until it was completely close-fitting. It looked like an ordinary martial suit, but it was Cheng Gongsheng's 7 Mysteries robe. It had once saved his life under Wang Yiwu's fist. He couldn't object to a monarch powerhouse, nor could he. However, he would still use his own way to give his friends the greatest support. For example, at this moment, he was the first to stand up and send Jiang Wang off. Jiang Wang tightened his coat and said calmly, "I will." There was no need to say much about him and Cheng Gongsheng. Most of the time, Cheng Gongsheng didn't agree with his decisions, but in the end, he would support him. Wei Sun looked at the fat guy with interest. "You're the son of Buddha too?" Cheng Gongsheng was never willing to mention his father, but it seemed that everyone couldn't avoid that name. He couldn't deny that the blood of that person flowed in his body. He turned around and bowed to the Tower Master of Fishing Sea Tower. Cheng Gongsheng greets the Tower Master. After the bow, he took out a jade bottle and handed it to Jiang Wang. "For healing." Without waiting for Jiang Wang to say anything, the fat figure had already walked back. Jiang Wang didn't even ask what medicine it was. He pulled the cork out and poured it into his mouth. He ate a few pills in a row as if he was eating fried beans. The effects of the pills prepared by Cheng Gongsheng wouldn't be bad. He wanted to restore himself to his best state before going to the bewildering world. Only then could he fight for that slim chance. Yen Fu was the second to walk over. He held a squirrel box and directly placed it in Jiang Wang's hand. "We'll wait for you to come back and drink. You still have to pay the bill." Jiang Wang smiled. He didn't look at what was in the box. It must be worth a lot. He didn't refuse. After this incident at the Tinya stage, their friendship had reached a certain level. "He's stubborn." Li Fengyao, who was sitting in the audience seat, said softly. She took off the jade ring on her right hand and handed it to Li Longchuan, who was sitting next to her. "I won't go over. You can give it to him." Li Longchuan took the jade ring and got up to walk into the field. He just happened to be behind Yen Fu. While putting Li Fengyao's jade ring on Jiang Wang's finger, he secretly stuffed a bead in his hand, the Mirage King's pearl that he took from Master Ninshua. "I think this thing will be useful in the bewildering world," he said softly, and then his voice became louder. "My sister lent you the jade ring. You have to take good care of it. You have to return it." After a pause, he said, "Speaking of which, you haven't been to my family's Ice Phoenix Island. Remember to come then." "I won't forget," Jiang Wang said. Chapter 869. Jiang Wuyo and Qi Xiao communicated for a while, then walked down from the main seat and went straight to Jiang Wang. She handed over a finger-like object. It was silver white in color and hollow in the middle, just enough to fit the index finger. She didn't say what it was, but when Jiang Wang took in his hand, he knew. It was called the compass. What was precious was not the object itself, but the record inside. Putting it on the index finger and putting a bit of thought into it, it was an extremely complicated three-dimensional map. Most of the places were dark, but the amount of information in those places that were bright was already enormous. This was the result of many years of exploration in the bewildering world on Juming Island, so it was needless to say how precious it was. And for the current Jiang Wang, it should be something he needed the most, because to a large extent, this thing could prevent him from getting lost in the bewildering world because he didn't have Starlight's sacred tower senses. Jiang Wuyo only said, "I took a big risk to give it to you. Before you die, you must destroy it. Do you understand?" These words didn't sound nice, but they carried a lot of weight. Before today, she and Jiang Wang didn't have any relationship, only an exchange. But this exchange had been done by Jiang Wuyo until now, so her sincerity was enough. "I will definitely do it," Jiang Wang said. Jiang Wuyo didn't say anything else and walked back. At this time, Su Xianqian walked up, his sleeves fluttering, his hands empty. In the audience, Jishu wanted to stand up, but was stopped by Zhao Wuyan. "No need," she transmitted. "Firstly, it's not worth it. Secondly, he won't accept anything you give him. You don't have that kind of relationship. Going up will only make things awkward." Jishu tried to stand up twice, but couldn't, so she pouted. Su Xianqian walked in front of Jiang Wang. Unlike the others, he didn't give him anything, only saying, "I've always drunk when I have wine. I don't have anything on me, and I don't have any extra money. I only have one folding fan, a gift from my master, so I can't leave it." He didn't feel embarrassed at all when he said that he didn't have much money. He continued, "Then I'll give you a poem." He didn't care whether Jiang Wang wanted it or not, and directly said, Wang Shi, walk slowly. After Tianya, there is Tianya. The sea is stormy. I hope you can return home soon." Jiang Wang smiled and said, "Good poem." Su Xianqian's dejection was swept away as he beamed with joy. Brother Jiang has always had such good taste. "Of course," Jiang Wang said. "When there's wine today, let's get drunk today. It's really good." Su Xianqian glared at him for a while, but in the end, he just patted him on the shoulder and turned to leave. Similarly, he was about to enter the bewildering world. On Jiang Wang's side, his friend came to see him off one after another. They presented him with all kinds of precious gifts, hoping that he would return safely. Granny Bijou stood there alone. The Isle of Wight was her home ground, a place she had managed for many years, but no one came to see her off. It was because she had murdered her fellow disciples and used her own child, whom she had raised, as a chess piece. This cold-blooded and cruel side of her was frightening. A person like her, no matter how good she was to her, could she be closer to her than Zhu Biqiang? When she was in power, there might be people who were willing to get close to her. But before this dangerous trip, no one was willing to invest anything in her. Whether it was emotional or resources, they all came at a cost. And there was no gain to be seen from her. Jiang Wang's situation this time was more dangerous, but all his friends present were willing to help him. Because everyone knew that no matter how well they treated Jiang Wang, they would receive the same or even more treatment from Jiang Wang. A just cause enjoys abundant support, while an unjust cause finds little support. It was nothing more than this. Wei Sun quietly watched this scene, not interfering with how these people armed Jiang Wang. Only after everyone had finished seeing him off, he said to Jiang Wang, "Before you complete your punishment, Zhu Biqiang will always be guilty. She will be waiting for you on the Tianya stage as a prisoner. You can take her away whenever you come back. But you'd better seize the time yourself," he said, "because she may not be able to last that long." He seemed to not care about the superior status of a supreme immortal at all. Instead, he enjoyed the feeling of manipulating Jiang Wang. After so many people armed Jiang Wang to increase Jiang Wang's chances of survival, he immediately proposed a time limit. Zhu Biqiang, who had lost all her cultivation, could only last until now because of immortal Cheng Guang's energy. She really didn't know how long she could last. In other words, Jiang Wang not only had to complete his punishment in the bewildering world, but he also had to do it as fast as possible. He had to take the initiative and take more risks. This was too harsh. However, Jiang Wang still couldn't refuse. As he had said, he was only grateful to Wei Sun for giving him this opportunity. He had no right to be dissatisfied. I understand, Jiang Wang said with a nod. This young man had a calmness that didn't match his age. But this calmness didn't seem to satisfy Wei Sun. This wasn't what he wanted to see. This supreme immortal, who didn't care about his status, looked at Jiang Wang and then at Granny Bijou. Before sending you to the bewildering world, don't you have anything to say to each other? Wei Sun seemed to want to watch a good show. He had to see some twists and turns. Granny Bijou seemed to have figured it out long ago. She didn't say a word during the process of people sending Jiang Wang gifts and seeing him off. She didn't say anything that was against the rules. At this time, her expression was gentle. She even bent down and cupped her hands. Little friend Jiang, no matter how many grudges we had before, in the bewildering world, we'll be comrades. We'll take care of each other. Jiang Wang didn't even look at her and didn't say a word. There was no need to pretend to be polite anymore. Everyone was clear about it. They were also clear about it. Only one of the two of them could walk out of the bewildering world, or none of them. Granny Bijou could still continue to act and maintain the so-called dignity before entering the bewildering world. But Jiang Wang wouldn't cooperate anymore. It was a matter of life and death. He had bent down too many times today and didn't want to bend down anymore. Granny Bijou wasn't annoyed by Jiang Wang's disregard. She straightened up and said to Wei Sun, "House Master, before going to the bewildering world, I want to say a few words to Biqiang." Wei Sun nodded slightly, indicating that he agreed. She turned and walked toward Zhu Biqiang, but Zhu Biqiang only looked at Jiang Wang. This silly girl's mouth kept opening and closing, saying no, but she couldn't make a sound. Until now, she hadn't figured out how many complicated things she was involved in. She only knew that Jiang Wang was going to take the risk for her again. She didn't want to. Granny Bijou squatted down and leaned close to her ear. Zhu Biqiang suddenly shrank back, as if she was escaping from a poisonous snake. But after all, she was held by the black-armored soldiers and couldn't escape far. Granny Bijou twitched the corner of her mouth, as if she was smiling bitterly, but she still said in her ear, "Do you know why I want to destroy your cultivation first? I want to use this to replace your punishment and save your life. Unfortunately, I can't." "Very good. Jiang Wang almost did what I couldn't do. You made a good friend. I'm sorry." She said the last word of apology very softly and softly. She only moved her lips and did not make a sound. After saying these words, she stood up again. Zhu Biqiang looked at her with eyes full of fear. Obviously, she didn't listen to a word. "Sigh." Granny Bijou sighed and said, "I can go now, House Master." Chapter 870. Thank you, Elder Chong. Wei Sun nodded. Chong Guang waved his hand and brought Granny Bijou and Jiang Wang out of the Tianya stage. When they left the Tianya stage, Jiang Wang saw a line of words on the cliff, which was said to be left by the dragon fisherman, the founder of the sea fishing tower. "The bright moon rises above the sea, and I look at the horizon from here." The word "look" was written especially bleakly, showing the suffering and hardship of gazing through the autumn water, making people weep. But the scenery changed with just a glance. Large sections of color disappeared, and large pieces of images peeled off. The scenery kept changing. What Jiang Wang saw was a vast expanse of fog. He didn't realize that he was falling until he heard the whistling of the wind. Chong Guang and Granny Bijou were gone. He turned slightly and steadied himself, and the fog in front of him disappeared. It was difficult to describe what he saw. The familiar sky and earth didn't seem to exist, and there wasn't even a sea. He couldn't tell up from down, left from right. He looked as far as he could, and it was a vast expanse of emptiness. Occasionally, there were a few black spots in his field of vision. Jiang Wang understood that this was the bewildering world. This was a field of emptiness, which naturally separated the coastal sea and the sea. There was no sense of direction here. Powerful cultivators could only give themselves a rough location and find their way home by sensing the starlight's sacred tower in the distant starry sky. He didn't panic. He knew where he was and had the corresponding awareness. He didn't act immediately. Instead, he stayed where he was and took out the Mirage King's Pearl that Li Longchuan gave him. He fiddled with it for a while and created an illusion of himself. At the same time, he hid himself 3 feet away from the illusion. It was hard to say whether the master could use the Mirage King's Pearl to deceive Zhao Wuyan. Zhao Wuyan was much stronger than Granny Bijou. The Mirage King's Pearl should be effective on Granny Bijou too. However, considering that the Sea Fishing Tower's illusions were unparalleled in the world, he couldn't be too careless even if the information showed that Granny Bijou wasn't good at illusions. The Mirage King's Pearl could only be used as a temporary measure. He couldn't rely on it to win the battle. Previously, there was no gap between them at the Tinya stage, and, at the same time, it was to prevent Granny Bijou from being on guard. At this moment, Jiang Wang opened the squirrel box given by Yen Fu. With one look, he was almost blinded by the strong aura of wealth. The squirrel box was filled with talismans. Mountain-suppressing talisman, water-stopping talisman, golden body talisman. There was a dazzling lineup of everything that one could think of. The value of this box, Jiang Wang couldn't calculate it. He had never seen so many talismans before, let alone possess and use them. One must know that the reason why the era of talismans died out so quickly was because of the huge production cost. In order to bear the mighty power, it was destined that the material must not be inferior. Just this alone had already locked down the cost. The stronger the talisman, the higher the requirement of the material. The most extravagant part was that the talismans were consumables. It was true that the cost of a magic tool or a mechanical beast from the school of Moism was much higher than a talisman of the same power. However, as long as the magic tool and mechanical beast were not damaged, they could be used continuously. However, the talisman disappeared as soon as it was torn apart. Using mechanical beasts to fight was already seen as burning Dao origin stones. Using talismans to fight was simply pouring Dao origin stones. Someone once said this to describe the feeling of using talismans to fight. It's like your storage box suddenly exploding. After a fight, you open your eyes and find that you have nothing left. In comparison, using the same amount of resources to invest in oneself was undoubtedly a better choice. The instantaneous Taoist techniques engraved in Tongtian Palace and the 5 prefectures were faster and harder to defend against than talismans. Not to mention that talisman masters were rare nowadays. There was no need to mention how expensive talismans were. The end of the era of talismans was the choice of history. Now, talismans were more of an auxiliary method. After all, low-grade talismans were relatively not that difficult to make. However, the effect was only slightly better than nothing. At that time, Su Xiuxing was in a business where his head was hanging on his belt. He should be richer than ordinary cultivators of the same level. However, the talismans he carried with him were so weak that it made one's hair stand on end. They definitely couldn't affect the current Jiang Wang. As for the box given by Yen Fu, Jiang Wang closed it and sighed with melancholy. How could he afford to pay it back? He suddenly resonated with Su Xiangqian's indignant scolding. Bastard! He didn't need to study the 7 mysterious robe on him anymore. He knew its defensive capabilities. He also understood the jade thumb ring that Li Fengyao gave to him from Li Longchuan. After checking the weapons that his friends had sent as reinforcements, he released a wisp of his consciousness and focused on the palanquin he wore on his left index finger. This little thing was his hope of returning home, and it was also the only thing he could rely on at this moment. Jiang Wuyo had repeatedly emphasized that Jiang Wang should destroy the palanquin before he died. It wasn't without reason. Its records were very detailed. Although it couldn't cover all the areas in the bewildering world, at least in the known areas, it was enough to keep the owner from being a headless fly. According to the mark on the palanquin, he was now in the Dingwei area. He didn't know if the division of the areas in Mu Valley and Sea Fishing Tower was the same, and he didn't know how the sea race divided the bewildering world. The good news was that the human race had already explored this area, so he wasn't completely clueless about the situation. The bad news was that the human race didn't have an advantage in this area. There was only one floating island that belonged to the cultivators of Moo Valley that human cultivators could enter to resupply. Most of the rest of the area was wilderness. There were 5 sea nests that corresponded to the human floating islands in the Dingwei area, and they had an overwhelming advantage over the human race. In other words, Jiang Wang could run into the sea race at any time and fight them at any time. The commander-level sea race that corresponded to the cultivators of the outer tower was his goal. But with his current strength, he wouldn't be able to sweep through the sea race at this level without external help. This was because the sea race was generally stronger than human cultivators of the same level. And if he ran into a sea race that corresponded to the cultivators of God's descent, or even stronger, he could only pray that he was fast enough. I should have asked Guan to help strengthen my invisibility cloak. When I went with Lin Yuxi to look for traces of the doorless hell, it might have been a good idea to find a way to contact Guan. Jiang Wang thought to himself. If invisibility cloak could work on the Sea Race King level, his safety would undoubtedly be greatly increased. Unfortunately, it was only a thought. But the most important thing right now wasn't the sea race, but Granny Bijou. Jiang Wang already knew how vicious that old woman was. Before he could cleanse himself, he had to kill Granny Bijou first. This was an urgent matter, but he couldn't afford to panic. They were both in the Dingwei area, but compared to him, Granny Bijou, who came from Sea Fishing Tower and had built Starlight's sacred tower long ago, must have come to Bewildering Worlds more than once. She was far more familiar with Bewildering Worlds than he was. Although he had Jiang Wuyo's advice, Granny Bijou was also a high-ranking member of Sea Fishing Tower. Sea Fishing Tower's understanding of Bewildering Worlds was no less than that of Jiueming Island. He didn't have an advantage over Granny Bijou in terms of geographical location or cultivation. He had to be extremely cautious to seize that 1% chance of victory. Jiang Wang silently thought for a while. After coming up with a rough plan, he began to move tentatively. No matter what he planned to do, he had to start by familiarizing himself with this place. Chapter 871. Granny Bijou nimbly turned around and stopped in midair. Without batting an eyelid, he had already quickly observed his surroundings. She had fought in the Bewildering World more than once and was very clear about the rules here. The Starlight Sacred Tower in the distant starry sky also told her where this place was. Reverend Chong Guang followed Wei Sun's instructions and chose a very fair area. The only floating island here didn't belong to the Sea Fishing Tower or Jiueming Island. Although in theory, all human cultivators should be treated equally on the floating island, it was inevitable that different forces would be biased to different degrees. This was something that no one could avoid. Mog Valley's forces were famous for being impartial in the Bewildering World and only focused on fighting the sea race. As long as they didn't fight directly on the floating island, no one would interfere with her in Jiang Wang's fight. This was good. This was too good. When the sect master decided to put Jiang Wang and her in the same area, she had already rekindled her hope. She had enough confidence in her strength and her accumulation over the years. Jiang Wang was a young Tianjiao, and time was his greatest friend. However, in the matter of accumulation, time was also his greatest enemy. He definitely didn't have enough experience, far from enough. Of course, he would have some good stuff on him. She had seen all the little tricks his friends had been playing when they were sending him off. But it didn't matter. Of course, it didn't matter. These things would all become her resources. They would help her get closer to God's descent again. She had already lost hope. Starting from scratch was too difficult, but if she could get Jiang Wang's hands, that thing that even Hai Zoming coveted, perhaps everything could be restarted. What was that thing? She didn't know, but it must be very important. What she said to Zhu Biqiong before parting at the Tianya stage was true. That apology was also true. But that apology wasn't for what had happened before, but for what had happened afterwards. Because such a young man had gone through fire and water for Zhu Biqiong, interrupted the sea sacrifice ceremony, mobilized his terrifying connections, and still wanted to save her in front of a true monarch expert and give her such a grand romance. But she wanted to kill this person with her own hands. She was apologizing for this. When Jiang Wang said that he only treated Zhu Biqiong as a friend, she didn't believe it. In her opinion, that was just an excuse for Jiang Wang to choose Qi, but he didn't dare to reject Fishing Sea Tower. There was no up, down, left, or right in the bewildering world. One could only use one's own body as a reference. The Starlight's sacred tower senses could only help to lock onto the general area. However, this feeling was not unfamiliar to him. Granny Bijou was very clear that Jiang Wang's unfamiliarity with the environment would be his biggest disadvantage. Even if he had the map of Zhuming Island in his hands, he could not immediately eliminate the sense of unfamiliarity. Kill Jiang Wang as soon as possible, because the strangeness would disappear with time. She was confident in her own strength. At the same time, she would never underestimate Tianjiao's ability to adapt. She would never underestimate the background of those famous families. The gifts that those people had given to Jiang Wang might be extraordinary. Granny Bijou flicked her little finger, and a water droplet flew out and turned into her appearance. As for herself, she transformed into a water droplet and followed behind him. Everyone on Crescent Island knew that Elder Bijou's ability was to tame beasts. She had almost never used her illusory ability in front of others. However, after cultivating in Fishing Sea Tower for so long, how could she not know anything about illusory techniques? Over a long period of time, she had accumulated a lot of experience. Hai Zoming died in a hurry, but she would not. She was more cautious than the weak. She would do everything she could to prevent accidents from happening, because this might be her last chance. She roughly sensed the location of the floating island with the Starlight Sacred Tower. The water droplet transformed into Granny Bijou, chose a direction, and flew quickly. On the Tianya stage, Venerable Chong Guang waved his hand and swept away Jiang Wang and Granny Bijou. Wei Sun strode to the main seat and ordered, "Take Zhu Biqiong to one side." The sea ritual continues. On the main seats, Yang Feng, Qi Xiao, and Jiang Wuyo stood obediently. When Wei Sun sat down on the big chair in the middle, they did not take another seat. With Wei Sun here, only a perfected cultivator could sit with him. Hai Jingping stood up once again to preside over the sea sacrifice ceremony. He seemed to have completely forgotten what happened just now. There was no anger or grievance on his face. Here we go. The drums sounded again. The black-armored soldiers escorted the prisoners up the stairs again. Other than Zhu Biqiong, who was taken to the side, nothing seemed to have changed. Cheng Xian, Ming He, and Cheng Gengsheng had already taken their seats to watch the ceremony. The five immortal sects sect leader Su Jilan and Elder Fan Qingqing followed behind them. This showed that the five immortal sect had completely leaned towards the Zhenggenjia. Of course, the five immortal sect did not rely on the Zhenggenjia. Instead, they wanted to rely on the Zhenggenjia to get closer to Qi. However, within the scope of Qi's influence, they would be closer to the Zhenggenjia. Lu Hua, who was the servant of Fishing Sea Tower, squeezed into the crowd without saying a word. Everything at Fishing Sea Tower was definitely over. After the sea ritual ended, he would return to Jueming Island. At that time, Jiang Wuyo would naturally have other arrangements for him. I just received news. Cheng Xian Ming He transmitted his voice. Chongji Island was attacked by pirates. All the defensive formations were destroyed. The resources accumulated on the island were all plundered. The Nine Profound sect on the nearby island sent out cultivators to chase the pirates away and raise their flag on Chongji Island. There were so many cultivation sects on the offshore islands, but pirates had never disappeared. Most of them were traders and heretics. They hid in some inaccessible sea regions and occasionally came out to plunder. Of course, there were many pirates who had factions supporting them. The pirates that attacked Chongji Island clearly belonged to this faction. Taking advantage of Chongxian, Ming He's absence, they attacked accurately. They destroyed the Zhenggenjia's operations on Chongji Island, destroyed the formations, and plundered everything of value. Chongji Island became an ownerless land. Since the Nine Profound sect chased away the pirates, they naturally became the new owner of Chongji Island. This method was simple and crude. Unless one had a powerful background, they could not force it. The Junginjia had the power to retaliate against the pirates, but they could not directly attack the Nine Profound sect. Behind the Nine Profound sect stood Fishing Sea Tower's fourth elder, Gu Huaixin. In other words, from now on, Chongji Island was gone. Chongxian, Minghe's voice did not contain any joy or sorrow, but there was no doubt that the Junginjia had suffered a great loss this time. Chenggung Sheng did not say much, only replying, "I will definitely take responsibility for Uncle's loss." This was one of Granny Bijou's plans. He had already realized this beforehand. It was just that Chongxian, Minghe, was still holding on to a fluke mentality. How could there be a fluke? Granny Bijou was thrown into the bewildering world, but Gu Huaixin, who was behind her, did not move. Chongxian, Minghe, did not say whether he believed it or not. He only looked at the scene, as if he was focused on the ceremony. Although this pair of uncle and nephew were not enemies, they were not close either. Chongxian, Minghe's complicated feelings towards his second brother, Chongxian Ming too, seemed to be projected onto his second brother's son. It was very difficult to have a clear attitude towards this. At the same time, the alienation towards the other Junginjia, which had formed since childhood, could not be easily erased in Cheng Gengsheng's heart. When it came to each other, in their interactions, they did not know what to do. On the field, Hai Jingping finally finished announcing the crimes of all the prisoners. This time, nothing unexpected happened. All the prisoners were escorted to the front of the cliff, facing the sea, with their backs to the crowd. Their cultivations were all crippled, and they cowered in the sea breeze. Some howled, some remained silent, and some begged for mercy. However, there was no response. "Please sacrifice them," Hai Jingping announced. The black-armored soldiers did not say a word, only pushing the prisoners forward in unison. 44 prisoners fell into the sea together. It seemed that they did not hear any screams, but also seemed that they had appeared, only to be annihilated by the sea breeze. Falling from such a high place, these prisoners who had lost their cultivations would definitely not be spared. Hai Jingping raised his hands and announced loudly, "Souls, return! Souls, return!" Everyone raised their hands high and shouted. Chapter 872. A gust of wind blew within the bewildering world. Jiang Wang sensed a slightly complicated impurity in the wind that didn't belong to the wind itself. It was extremely subtle, and if he hadn't been observing everything with his greatest vigilance, he probably wouldn't have sensed it. Perhaps they couldn't be called impurities because they didn't have a physical form. He pondered for a long time before he was able to roughly identify them. There was something on the emotional level. He used his soul concealment serpent to come into contact with them and was finally able to confirm that they were indeed related to the cultivators who had died in battle. They weren't complete souls or remnant spirits. They were similar to a kind of obsession. They were sentiments that refused to give up in a place like the bewildering world. He finally connected the dots. Today was the 4th of the 4th month, the day of the annual sea sacrifice. The cultivators of the nearby islands were offering sacrifices to the sea, using a devout ceremony to welcome the return of the heroic spirits. Dying in the bewildering world meant losing one's soul. It wasn't the physical body that was destroyed, but only the soul was left. If the physical body died, the soul would also be lost. It was easy to get lost while the physical body was still there, let alone when only the soul was left and had lost the guidance of the Starlight Sacred Tower. Some people lost both their bodies and souls, while some sentiments were trapped in the bewildering world and had no one to rely on. It was similar to observing a bit of a true spirit drifting in the forest ocean origin realm, but it wasn't exactly the same. These sentiments were even weaker than a true spirit and had no possibility of being reconstructed. In fact, Jiang Wang knew that a bit of a true spirit was no longer possible to be reconstructed. It was just that observation had shattered his understanding. However, people believed that if they were summoned back to the human territory, there would be a chance for the brave souls that originated from these sentiments to enter the cycle of reincarnation. If they couldn't endure until the sea sacrifice returned, they would vanish into thin air. Everything would be lost. That was why there were such gentle winds in the bewildering world today. They couldn't take anything away, nor could they change the bewildering world. It was just that homesick people would eventually return home. Jiang Wang tried to relax his control over his body, but his body didn't fall straight down. Instead, it rose for a long time and moved to the left for a while before it began to fall. Of course, the so-called up, down, left, and right was only a reference to his standing posture. There was no pattern to this movement trajectory. It was just following the chaotic rules of the bewildering world. He controlled his body and flew forward. Every bit of distance was not easy. He was trying his best to get used to the bewildering world. That way, he would be able to fully display his combat strength in the bewildering world. His true strength was not as good as Granny Baiju's, and if he was suppressed because he could not adapt to the bewildering world, it would be tantamount to seeking death. Fortunately, this process was not very difficult. His control of Tao energy had already reached a very subtle level. This was the result of his confrontation with the sage earlier. This allowed him to quickly adapt to the uniqueness of the bewildering world. The Tao energy in his body could react to the changes in the outside world at any time, allowing him to walk as if he was walking on flat ground. At this time, he already knew what the black spots he saw when he first entered the bewildering world were. Most of them were boulders, different shapes and orientations. Due to the fact that they were also in a state of disarray, it was also impossible to use these boulders to determine the direction. Fortunately, there was a guide. Jiang Wang sighed with emotion more than once during the short time he spent exploring the bewildering world. Some of the boulders were even hundreds of feet in diameter. In Jiang Wang's eyes, they were completely like small islands. However, they were not so-called floating islands, and there were no humans living on them. This meant that the composition of the floating islands was not simple. It was definitely not just an island floating in the air. There must be some necessary conditions that needed to be met. Otherwise, there should be more than one floating island in the Dingwei region. Jiang Wang went up to those boulders to observe. The quality of the boulders was very ordinary, and they were not the kind of floating stones he saw in the Shinkong Temple. They could float in the air only because of the uniqueness of the bewildering world. This made him give up the idea of collecting some stones and taking them away. Most of the boulders were bare, and there were basically no living things on them. There were no trees, soil, or the like, only some moss occasionally. There were no traces of human life. That was also true in this bewildering world. Except for the army in formation, all the people who fought in the bewildering world were cultivators of the outer building and above. They were either fighting or resting on the floating islands. There was no need for them to live in these places. The route Jiang Wang chose now was according to the plan made by the guide. It circled around the only human floating island in the Dingwei region in a large area. This route could be seen as a ball, with the floating island at the center of the ball. Jiang Wang's route was drawing the surface of the ball. The reason for this choice was that he put himself in Granny Bijou's shoes. It was easy for him to come to a conclusion. The sooner he killed Jiang Wang, the better. He hoped to get rid of Granny Bijou as soon as possible, but when Granny Bijou also had the same hope, he needed some patience. Looking for a needle in a haystack was obviously not a good choice. For Granny Bijou, who had the advantage in strength, it was easier to catch Jiang Wang by staying near the floating island. This was because Jiang Wang had to go to the floating island to resupply. This kind of resupply was not only about resources, magic weapons, Dao Yuan stones, medicine, and the like, but also about the most important mutation problem. A long time ago, cultivators discovered that if they stayed in the bewildering world for a long time, their bodies would be unconsciously changed by the bewildering world. It was not as strange as having a few extra heads and hands. This kind of change was extremely subtle, so much so that it was impossible to notice. This was because the interaction between life and the environment was done subtly at all times. It was just that people who stayed in the bewildering world for too long would more or less have some kind of reaction when they returned to human territory. They were no longer so adapted to the human world. Those who were less affected would only need to recuperate for a while. Those who were more affected would even have permanent changes. Their combat strength would decline. They would lose the ability to control their Dao Yuan. They would not be able to sense their origin power, and even breathing would be painful. This kind of change was called mutation. Divine Advent Realm cultivators would not experience mutation because they had a golden body and jade marrow that could easily seal their own changes. However, it was impossible for all the warriors in the bewildering world to be Divine Advent Realm cultivators. The solution to mutation was also very simple. Every once in a while, before the body mutated, they would return to the floating island to rest for a night. If they could focus on recuperating with the environment, this time could be shortened. To a certain extent, the floating island was equivalent to a small enclave of the human race. Returning to the floating island was like returning to human territory. It was precisely because of this significance that the floating island became the island of life for the human race in the bewildering world. The number of floating islands could also represent the strength of a certain area. Jiang Wang chose to go around the floating island for two reasons. First, he wanted to avoid a direct confrontation with Granny Bijou before he completely adapted to the bewildering world. Second, he wanted to test Granny Bijou's decisiveness. Granny Bijou wanted to get rid of Jiang Wang as soon as possible. Of course, she also knew that Jiang Wang was in a hurry to complete his cleansing so that he could return to the Tianya Terrace and take Zhu Biqiang away. Then the question in front of her was Jiang Wang's priority to kill her? Jiang Wang had brought so many resources with him. Could he complete his cleansing before the mutation happened? Was it possible that he did not need to go to the floating island at all and could leave directly after completing his goal? No matter how intelligent Granny Bijou was, these questions were inevitable. These conflicts would definitely arise. Her greed for Jiang Wang was too obvious. There was no way she would let Jiang Wang go in the bewildering world. As long as he grasped this point, he could make a relatively accurate judgment. Jiang Wang could even determine the approximate range of Granny Bijou's squatting. She would not be too close to the floating island, because if she was too close, Jiang Wang would very likely escape directly into the floating island during the battle. Human cultivators were not allowed to kill each other on the floating island. However, she would not be too far away from the floating island. If she was too far away, it would be easy to overlook. Therefore, she should be making a small circle within the big circle that Jiang Wang was going around. She did not necessarily need to make a detour. She just needed to set up eyes at the boundary of this small circle. However, during the first few days of squatting, she would definitely not encounter Jiang Wang. After that, she would be in a dilemma. Should she continue to squat and wait for Jiang Wang, or should she take the initiative to attack? If she took the initiative to attack, it was very likely that she would miss Jiang Wang going to the floating island to resupply. However, if she continued to squat and wait, Jiang Wang might have successfully cleansed his sin and left. This kind of entanglement would definitely torture that old woman all the time. The longer it took, the more difficult it would be for her to advance or retreat. The opportunity that Jiang Wang was waiting for would come at that time. Chapter 873. Jiang Wang chose the Dieter route because it was too far away from the floating island, so it was not safe at all. But to Jiang Wang, Granny Bijou was more dangerous than the Sea Clan. Of course, the Sea Clan was much more powerful, but they did not know who Jiang Wang was. Unless they bumped into him, they would not deliberately target him. He wanted to familiarize himself with this place, so it was best to make arrangements in advance to gain the geographical advantage. Just like when he chose to wait for Hai Zongming at the Camel Peak Mountain to weaken the power of his water Dao technique to the greatest extent. He was sure that Granny Bijou would wait for him in the inner circle, and he would wait for Granny Bijou outside. This was a gamble. If Granny Bijou was patient enough, she would stay near the floating island and not move. Jiang Wang, who spent more energy on waiting instead of hunting the Sea Clan, would not be able to complete his cleansing in advance. He would have to go to the floating island to resupply. In that case, Granny Bijou would have the geographical advantage. Jiang Wang decided to take this gamble. It was stupid to pin victory on luck, but he was not betting on luck. He was betting on his own judgment of Granny Bijou. He could choose not to gamble and directly hunt the Sea Clan to complete his cleansing as soon as possible. But he did not know when Granny Bijou would catch up. In a sudden battle, the most important test was the real combat power of both sides. Jiang Wang was undoubtedly at a disadvantage. In order to win as soon as possible, he had to wait. It was only after passing by the fifth boulder that Jiang Wang realized that the floating boulders in the maze world were not fixed in place. In order to confirm this discovery, he went back the way he came. The distance between two boulders was indeed shortened, and their positions were slanted. The boulders moved extremely slowly, and because of the lack of a reference, it was difficult to detect. The key point of this discovery was that the idea of using the boulders as a beacon to establish a map memory failed. Of course, something that could not be fixed could not become a beacon. What was more unfortunate was that Jiang Wang had originally planned to make special arrangements on a few boulders to lure Granny Bijou over, but now it was obvious that it would not work. By the time he painstakingly lured Granny Bijou over, the boulders would probably leave together with his arrangements. Fortunately, he had a guide. Otherwise, not to mention ambushing Granny Bijou, it would be difficult for her not to get lost. This was the 8th black spot that Jiang Wang had encountered. Although the boulder could move, Jiang Wang still subconsciously recorded some information. It might not be useful, but it was never a bad thing to be prepared. When the black dot gradually appeared in his field of vision, Jiang Wang realized that it was not a boulder, but a fish. It was a huge fish that was about 30 feet long and 20 feet tall. It had black scales and crisscrossing sharp teeth. It was swimming in the air. Apparently, it had seen Jiang Wang and suddenly sped up. This was the first sea beast that Jiang Wang encountered in the bewildering world, which greatly surprised him. It wasn't because this sea beast was too strong, but because it was too weak. It was much weaker than the 8-clawed sea beast that Jiang Wang had killed near Yoxiao Island. The giant black fish slammed into him and opened its mouth, its sharp teeth intersecting. An intense stench rushed towards him. Jiang Wang drew his sword. An extremely elegant sword appeared in the air. Before the giant black fish approached Jiang Wang, its body was cut in half from the middle. Driven by inertia, it flew away from Jiang Wang. Organs, blood, and body parts. They flew away. It was really too weak. At most, it only had the combat power of a heavenly cycle realm cultivator. Was this a cub of a sea beast, or was it the weakest kind of sea beast? Before this, Jiang Wang's concept of the sea beast strength was based on the 8-clawed sea beast. He thought that it would at least have the combat power of an intermansion realm cultivator. However, the sea beast he encountered in the bewildering world was completely different from what he had imagined. Although the 8-clawed sea beast he encountered on Yoxiao Island was crazy and out of control, he could still feel its influence on his elemental energy and instinctively control it to release spells. On the other hand, the sea beast in front of him only had pure physical strength and no intelligence to speak of. It gave him the feeling that it was closer to a ferocious beast, but not as bloodthirsty and crazy. In other words, in terms of physical strength, it was similar to a ferocious beast. In terms of intelligence, it was like an ordinary beast. The inertia exerted by the giant fish's last dash disappeared. Its body, organs, and blood instantly scattered in all directions. Some floated up, some fell down, some floated to the left, some moved to the right. It looked like it had been dismembered by 5 horses. The smell of blood immediately spread. Jiang Wang immediately flew away. After flying for a long distance, he looked back and found that there were 13 black spots in the distance. It couldn't be a floating boulder. After that, Jiang Wang encountered two more sea beasts. He tested them again and found that these sea beasts were indeed weaker. The giant black fish was not an isolated case. This was very reasonable. There were strong and weak races in every race. When human cultivators tamed sea beasts, they would definitely choose the stronger ones to capture. However, Jiang Wang faintly felt that this might not be the case. This place was very far from the floating island. It was completely wild. The sea beast combat power should be at an average level. They should not be this weak, unless this was the common level of combat power among sea beasts. Truly powerful sea beasts were very rare. Something unexpected happened when he encountered the fourth sea beast. At this time, he had already passed by 10 boulders. It was a frog-like sea beast. It had a big belly, a bulging face, green skin, red eyes, and a pair of buffalo horns on its head. With a kick of its hind legs, it leaped high into the air, pressing down on him like a small mountain. This sea beast was stronger than the 3 he encountered before. It should have the combat power of a Heaven Ascension Realm cultivator. It was certainly stronger than an ordinary Heaven Ascension Realm cultivator, but it was no match for a Soaring Dragon Realm cultivator. However, the most important thing was that a wrought tan chair was hanging between the 2 horns of this frog-like sea beast. A tall and sturdy figure was sitting on the wrought tan chair. 2 big axes were placed under his feet, one on each side of his hands. A member of the sea race. Only then did Jiang Wang realize that he had encountered the first member of the sea race since entering the bewildering world. He had truly come into contact with the sea race. At the same time he saw the other party, the figure had already leaped into the air. He flew higher and faster than the frog-like sea beast, raising his big axes to chop it down. He had a pair of blue eyes and a bald head. He was clad in plate armor, and his arms, which held the axes, were muscular. Before his figure landed, the whistling sound of wind breaking had already closed in on him. There was no communication. There was no need for communication between humans and members of the sea race when they met in the wilderness. However, Jiang Wang could observe him so clearly in the blink of an eye and even have the time to consider his axe techniques. Naturally, it was because Jiang Wang was stronger than him. Clang! With a sweep of his sword, sparks flew. The tall and sturdy member of the sea race borrowed the strength of the frog-like sea beast and the momentum of his jump, but he was still easily slashed back by the sword. Obvious gaps had already appeared on the blades of the 2 big axes. This member of the sea race was obviously not stupid. After one strike, he realized that he was no match for Jiang Wang. He immediately raised his axes, and by the time he came down again, they had already turned into giant pincers. In front of Jiang Wang, a giant crab-shaped sea beast appeared. Its shell was like black iron, and its pincers were raised high like giant axes. Its aura was more than doubled. The Heaven Ascension Realm frog-like sea beast had originally wanted to bite Jiang Wang. However, it paused on the spot, intimidated by the former's aura. A thought flashed through Jiang Wang's mind. This was the kind of sea beast he had encountered on the Summer Island. The sea race and the water race were close relatives of the same origin, but there was already a fundamental difference between them. Could it be that the tamed guardian sea beasts on the islands near the sea were actually the true forms of the sea race? Well, Dian Yang has a Writer of the Year award. You can find the author if you search for his works. The top 50 can get the title of a fan. I just found out about this. I'm ranked 105. Not bad. If you get a free literary tycoon talisman, you can donate to Ajin. The most important thing is to participate. Don't spend money, don't spend money, don't spend money. I'll say it again. The most important thing is to participate. Happy salted fish. Chapter 874. Sea Beast. Jiang Wang's tone was filled with doubt. He subconsciously spoke in cheese language, but the other party clearly understood him. The giant crab that the bald member of the Sea Clan transformed into was furious. He also roared in cheese language. Lowly slave, how dare you insult the Sea Lord? His voice was like thunder, and he directly smashed down the giant pincers like hammers. Clang! The giant pincers smashed onto a silver-white light circle that suddenly lit up. They could not break through it, and they could not even send it flying. Jiang Wang held up a circle of sword and easily blocked this attack. No wonder the sea of consciousness of the eight-clawed sea beast looked like that. No wonder the eight-clawed sea beast had an obvious soul. No wonder the sea beasts he encountered along the way were different from it. This sea beast was not that sea beast. Looking at the furious appearance of this beast-shaped member of the Sea Clan, it was obvious that it felt that it had suffered a great humiliation. The term sea beast should be a kind of insult to it, just like how humans were scolded as dogs. Clang, clang, clang. The giant pincers were like hammers, smashing down repeatedly. The sound was like iron smashing, and it was extremely powerful. However, the circle of sword did not move at all. In the silver-white circle of sword, Jiang Wang's clear voice sounded, "It's my turn." In the gap between the two giant pincers smashing down and raising, the silver-white circle of sword dissipated, and the sword was still horizontally in front of it. It was like a famous scholar writing excitedly. With a swing of the brush, there was an ink mark formed by a sword light between heaven and earth. Crack! There was the sound of something breaking. The bald member of the Sea Clan first heard this sound, and then he saw that the entire front part of his right pincer that he had smashed down had suddenly separated. Then he felt pain. After the pain, he had time to panic. His sturdiest and most powerful weapon had been cut in half by a sword. What sword was that? Was it also a famous weapon that those human cultivators were proud of? Thoughts flashed through his mind like lightning. But in the real world, his left pincer had already smashed forward instinctively. He no longer planned to defeat his opponent. He only wanted to temporarily drive him back and fight for a chance to escape. However, there was another sword mark. In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, Jiang Wang's sword slashed from left to right. His right hand loosened, and his left hand caught the sword hilt and pulled it back from right to left. This set of movements was as smooth as flowing water. The famed scholar's destitute sword had been completely grasped and practiced into the basics. 2 swords, 2 horizontal slashes, and 2 pincers. Only then did the bald sea creature's giant crab howl in pain. Jiang Wang took advantage of the opportunity to step forward. Before the light blue blood sprayed out from the giant crab, he stepped on the hill-like body of the giant crab. He squatted down, held his long sword vertically, and directly plunged it down. It easily pierced through the thick carapace, and the Sauvignon Blanc directly pierced through the body. The surging Tao energy that instantly gathered on it made the bald member of the sea tribe have no doubt that once it exploded, it would crush everything in his body. "Can we have a nice chat now?" Jiang Wang asked. At the same time, the handsome young man was half squatting on the back of the giant crab's shell. His left hand was holding the sword to support his body, and his right hand was placed on his right knee. His palm was facing down, and a terrifying flame was burning quietly under his right hand. The originally ferocious giant crab's pincers were broken, and its momentum was completely gone. It lay motionless in the air. The frog-like sea creature didn't have any intelligence, but after looking blankly for a few times, it somehow felt an instinctive fear. It turned around and jumped away without looking back. The giant crab didn't dare to move as the fear of death hung in front of its door. However, it bared its teeth and shouted bravely, "Don't even think about getting the secrets of the sea tribe from me." Jiang Wang paused for a moment and then said, "I don't need you to tell me the secrets of the sea tribe. I just want to have a casual chat with you." What a joke. How could a member of the sea tribe in the Soaring Dragon realm know the secrets of the sea tribe? Jiang Wang wasn't so foolish as to expect to find any shocking secrets from such a weak guy. He just wanted to add some common knowledge about the sea tribe. The giant crab didn't utter a word. It was obvious that it had tacitly agreed to Jiang Wang's request to have a casual chat. "Speaking of which, I haven't come to this area for a long time." Jiang Wang asked, "How many sea nests are there now?" He first picked a question that he knew the answer to test the sincerity of the sea tribe. He didn't expect the other party to tell him everything. But if he lied about such a simple question, then there was no point in chatting. He would just kill him. The giant crab snorted. There are already 5. You slaves will be chased out of the bewitching world by the noble Sea Lord clans sooner or later. Interesting. The humans called this place the bewitching world, while the sea tribe called it the bewitching world. However, he knew that his life was now in the hands of his enemy, so he finally removed the word lowly. Jianwang wasn't angry. He asked again, "Which lord are you under?" "I'm not afraid to tell you that I'm a soldier under the White Raja. If you know what's good for you, quickly let me go. Otherwise..." While he was threatening, Jianwang gently pulled the hilt of his sword. Extremely sharp sword qi immediately wreaked havoc in his body, turning his remaining words into screams. The hierarchy of the Sea tribe was roughly divided into soldiers, generals, commanders, princes, and imperial lords. Soldiers corresponded to human soaring dragon realm cultivators. Generals corresponded to human intermansion realm cultivators, and commanders corresponded to human outer building realm cultivators. As for princes, their strength fluctuated greatly and corresponded to human divine advent and insightful truth cultivators. The Sea tribe called them princes, but there was a difference between one-word princes and multi-word princes. One-word princes were far stronger than multi-word princes. On the human side, one-word princes were called true princes, while multi-word princes were called false princes. They corresponded to insightful truth cultivators and divine advent cultivators, respectively. As for imperial lords, they naturally corresponded to human Tao evolution cultivators. The information above imperial lords wasn't something Jianwang could know. This Sea tribe member said that he was a subordinate of the White Raja, which meant that the White Raja was the biggest tiger skin he could pull on in the Dingwei district. In other words, the Sea tribe's strongest fighting force in the Dingwei district was most likely a false king. This was a good thing. The strongest fighting force generally wouldn't be easily mobilized. Usually, a false king would only be able to travel around and hunt if a true king was present. This was because, compared to killing 1 or 2 opponents, consolidating the sea nest was more important. It was the same for the human race. If there were no insightful truth cultivators, the divine advent cultivators would generally guard the floating islands. Therefore, it could be concluded that in the wilderness of the Dingwei district, the main forces of both sides should be outer building realm cultivators and sea tribe commanders. It should be said that the battlefield that Venerable Chongguang had chosen was not too difficult for them. "Your mouth is really dirty. Please be more polite." Jianwang stopped and waited for the Sea tribe member to stop screaming before saying, "I don't mean to offend you. However, I would like to ask, why are you so angry that I mistook you for a sea beast?" The Sea tribe member struggled fiercely. "Don't think of humiliating me. Calm down," Jianwang shouted in a deep voice. The true samadhi fire directly approached the Sea tribe member's shell. "Is there a need for me to humiliate you at this time?" The Sea tribe member felt a burning sensation from the terrifying flames. The Sea tribe member calmed down. Sea beasts have yet to develop intelligence. They are equivalent to the pets and wild beasts in the human race's territory. However, I have manifested the true form of the Sea Lord. How can I not be angry when you confuse us? Other than being slightly stronger, Jianwang really could not see the difference between the so-called true form of the Sea Lord and the sea beasts. However, he understood what the Sea tribe member meant. For example, some humans practice the eagle claw technique or the dog-leg technique. They could practice these, but if you directly called them dogs, it would be insulting them. However, the humans had restricted the Sea tribe members from manifesting the true form of the Sea Lord. They used them as watchdogs and called them the guardian sea beasts. This was undoubtedly an act of naked humiliation to the Sea tribe. This was also clear evidence of the blood feud between the two races. Jianwang was still digesting this information. The Sea tribe member who manifested the true form of the giant crab seemed to see an opportunity and took the initiative to speak. "It seems that you have just arrived at the bewitching world and do not understand the Sea tribe. How about this? Let's make a deal." "No need." Jianwang extinguished the true samadhi fire in his palm and pressed his palm down. Chapter 875. Jiang deliberately extinguished the Samadhi true fire, of course, not to test the Sea Clan shell with his bare hands. When his palm touched the shell that was scorching hot from the Samadhi true fire, the black snake had already swam out of the inner mansion and instantly drilled into the sea of consciousness of the Sea Clan under his feet. Speaking of which, the soul concealment snake also had the use of taking over a magpie's nest. Although it was not as mysterious as some secret techniques, it could still control the opponent's body when they lost the ability to resist. However, Jiang had never tried it on a human. Now, he wanted to try whether he could control the Sea Clan with the soul concealment snake in this bewildering world. This would play a pivotal role in his future plans. The soul concealment snake swam into a vast sea of consciousness. With the help of the soul concealment snake, Jiang could see that on the island in the center of the sea of consciousness, there was a bald man holding two axes. Obviously, this was the manifestation of the Sea Clan soul. It was different from the soul of the eight-clawed sea beast Jiang had observed on Yuxia Island. If the two were both Sea Clan, why were the images of their souls different? While he was stunned, the other party had already reacted. "You want to enslave me? I'll fight you to the death." The bald man raised his axes high and roared in the sea of consciousness. His entire soul suddenly swelled and turned into a giant crab holding its pincers high. Jiang felt that the power of his soul had doubled in an instant. The eyes of the giant crab's soul were different from the outside world. They had turned crazy blood red, as if it had lost its mind in an instant. Before Jiang had time to think about the meaning of this change, the giant crab suddenly exploded. The soul had self-detonated. Jiang quickly cut off the connection with the soul concealment snake and stepped on the ground. The blue cloud mark disappeared as soon as it appeared, and his figure was already high in the sky. The Sea Lord's original form, which had the appearance of a giant crab, had already lost all signs of life and was floating in place. A gust of wind could take it away. Jiang stood alone in the sky and fell into a short silence. What made him fall silent was not the loss of dozens of soul concealment snakes. This loss could be quickly repaired. It was because he suddenly realized the reason why the guardian sea beasts in the nearby islands had lost control. The body structure of the Sea Clan was different from that of the human clan. There was no heavenly palace, five-mansion sea, hidden star sea, etc., but only one sea of consciousness. This sea of consciousness was similar to the five prefectures sea of the human body. The island in the middle of the sea of consciousness was also very similar to the heaven and earth isolated island of human cultivators. Of course, this was not the main point. More importantly, the image of the bald, brawny man that Jiang saw at first glance was the manifestation of the soul of the Sea Clan. The soul's soul to the Sea Clan just now. The Sea Lord's true form had already made the Sea Clan's physical bodies even more powerful. It could even be said that it far surpassed their close relatives of the Sea Clan. Now, he was able to use this ability to instantly strengthen the power of his spirit. Could this evolution be called the Sea Master's divine soul, true form? It was CCCCCC. SCCCCCC. At that time, when he saw the destroyed restriction flag in the sea of consciousness of the eight-clawed sea beast, he had a feeling that the restriction flag didn't seem to match the soul of the eight-clawed sea beast. However, how could an expert who could capture a powerful member of the sea tribe in the bewildering world and set up a restriction to control them make such a mistake? How could he ignore the problem that even Jiang could see? Combined with what he had seen just now, Jiang concluded that the changes in the eight-clawed sea beast's soul had occurred later. The beastified divine soul directly shattered the restriction, and thus, the phenomenon of the guardian sea beasts of the offshore islands going berserk frequently occurred. He had never heard of the sea race's divine soul being able to transform into a beast. Did this mean that the sea race's strength had improved during this period of time? The sea tribe member that Jiang Wang had just suppressed was only at the soldier level, the most ordinary sea tribe member. However, even he had grasped the power of divine soul beast transformation, even though he had lost his consciousness as soon as he transformed. But this was undoubtedly enough. This method had already become widespread within the sea race. The divine soul beast of the sea tribe at the soldier level would go crazy when they transformed, but what about the warlord level? What about the commander level, or even the king level? Was it possible to suppress the madness and strengthen them? The sea race's overall strength would undoubtedly soar because of this. Just thinking about it was enough to make one shudder. Jiang Wang was sure that he wasn't the first person to discover this. The first time he had come to the bewildering world, he had discovered that the sea race's divine soul beast transformation. Those experts who had spent many years fighting in the bewildering world should have discovered it. This was because the sea race didn't seem to be hiding it. Or rather, it was impossible to hide the large-scale strengthening of an entire race. Yang Lu had said that Ocean Fishing Tower had long since begun investigating the phenomenon of the sea beasts going berserk. He had also seen Ocean Fishing Tower's eldest senior brother, Chun Jitao, running around. Given Ocean Fishing Tower's strength, they should have discovered it long ago. Jueming Island and Mog Valley weren't to be trifled with. So how should the human race deal with this? The human race's combat strength in the bewildering world had to be strengthened. She had to send at least a 9-soldier level army over. Perhaps this was why Mog Valley and Jueming Island had sent enlightened masters to participate in this grand ceremony, to repair and strengthen the human race's defensive line. Jiang Wang set aside these thoughts for the time being. Something as important as the defensive line at the sea border wasn't for him to decide. He would think about other things after he had safely left the bewildering world. He stopped here and waited for a while. The smell of blood from the corpse of the Sea Lord had spread for a long time, but no sea beasts had come looking for food. It seemed that the message, "the sea race is not food," had been engraved into the sea beast's instincts. Jiang Wang didn't do anything else. He continued to circle around, searching for the most suitable location and waiting for the best opportunity. But before he flew far away, he suddenly thought. He wondered how the floating corpses were digested by the bewildering world. Were they like the corpses in the modern realm? Jiang Wang and Granny Bijou had already begun their battle in the bewildering world, but no one was talking about them on the world's edge stage. The heroic spirits of a lost, bewildering world had already set foot on the path of return. Under Hai Jinping's guidance, there were prayers, sacrificial dances, and many other activities that had all come to an end. At this point in time, the bewildering sea ceremony was nearing its end. The many guests who had participated in the ceremony were getting more and more nervous, because the most important moment had only just arrived. Wei Sun, the master of the Ocean Fishing Tower, was sitting on a large chair, looking forward with no sadness or joy. Qi Xiao, Yang Feng, and Jiang Wuyo, who were also in the main seats, were all standing obediently. Jiang Wuyo, in particular, was getting more and more uncomfortable. No matter who it was, standing near an unfriendly monarch expert would be very uncomfortable, because you knew very well that he could blow you to death with a single breath. But this wasn't the reason why Jiang Wuyo wanted the bewildering sea ceremony to end as soon as possible. What made her uneasy was that a person of Wei Sun's level didn't need to appear in this bewildering sea ceremony, but he did. So why did he appear in the bewildering sea ceremony? Was it just to throw Jiang Wang into the bewildering world? That was like blowing an ant away. At most, it was just a coincidence. It couldn't be a serious matter for such an expert. This variable, which was beyond her control and could very well affect the situation of the entire offshore islands, was the reason why she, the master of Huaying Palace, was uneasy. Those people who participated in the bewildering sea ceremony with me. After Hai Jinping ended the ceremony, Wei Sun finally spoke, his voice full of sadness. They're all gone. Chapter 876. No one could respond to Wei Sun's sudden nostalgia. Most of the people present didn't even know when Wei Sun was talking about back then. Fortunately, this nostalgia only lasted for a moment. Wei Sun used his calm eyes to look at everyone present. Do you know about the sea race? Among the transcendent cultivators in the offshore islands, who could attend the ceremony at the Tianya stage, who knew nothing about the sea race, but who could calmly say that they knew in front of Wei Sun. Everyone knows that the sea race is strong and is a great enemy of the human race. But how many people know how strong the sea race is? And how strong are they? Wei Sun sat steadily, casually describing the passage of time. The dragon is the lord of the sea race. In the Middle Ages, the human emperor Lai Shan chased the dragon race to the blue sea. From then on, the dragon race disappeared from the world. The sea race also split up. Some of them stayed in the modern world and formed an alliance with the human race. Most of them went to the blue sea with the dragon race, waiting for the day of their return. The dragon race mixed with most of the sea race and adapted to the harsh environment of the blue sea, gradually evolving into the sea race of today. The sea race that originally lived in the modern world adapted to the blue sea, tamed the sea beasts, and dealt with the dangerous opponents in the blue sea. How did they develop the Sea Lord's original form? He Zhen became the master of the blue sea. How did they mix and evolve into the sea race of today? From the perspective of the sea tribe, this was definitely a grand and magnificent history. But from a perspective of the human race, as long as they knew that it had happened, as long as they understood that the sea race was also a race with a great history and inheritance, they couldn't be underestimated. The sea race occupied the blue sea since the Middle Ages. But from the Middle Ages until now, the sea race's efforts to return to the modern world have never stopped. This is not an ordinary opponent. His war with the human race has lasted for countless years, spanning the Middle Ages and Late Ages. Wei Sun continued, "We never dared to underestimate our opponents, but we might have still underestimated them." Everyone was still trying to figure out what he meant. Wei Sun asked, "Daoist Yang, is there any news from Mog Valley?" This question alarmed everyone. Being suddenly called out, Yang Feng had no choice but to speak up. Recently, there have been some changes in the sea race. Their Sea Lord's original form has evolved to the soul level, like thunder breaking trees and hailstones breaking tiles. This news was shocking. It had to be said that compared to the human race, the sea race was more. The sea beasts that they regarded as pets and slaves were already in the meridian state and the heaven-reaching state. Ordinary members of the Sea Clan were soldiers and had the battle prowess of a soaring dragon realm cultivator. On the other hand, most of the human race were ordinary people who had yet to embark on the path of cultivation. They might not even be able to defeat ordinary beasts, let alone sea beasts that were generally huge in size. He had to diligently train his body and recuperate his body to obtain the meridian unlocking pill. Once he consumed it, his Tongtian palace would appear. Only then would he be able to embark on the path of transcendence and cultivate step by step. The harsh environment of the blue sea was only one of the reasons. Those innately weak members of the Sea Clan were simply unable to survive in the blue sea. But the most important reason was the Sea Lord's original form. The Sea Lord's original form was terrifying not because it was a secret technique, but because it had become an innate divine ability under the guidance of the sea race's ancestors. Every member of the sea race could manifest the Sea Lord's original form. This was why the sea race called themselves the Sea Lord's Clan. The powerful Tao techniques created by the human race were as numerous as the stars. However, not everyone could learn any Tao technique. When human cultivators knocked on the inner abode to search for the body's hidden treasures, the divine ability seeds they plucked were indeed powerful. Many of the divine abilities were only stronger than the Sea Lord's true form, not weaker. However, most transcendental cultivators were unable to pluck divine abilities. It could be said that the Sea Lord's original form was as important to the sea race as the meridian unlocking pill was to the human race. Due to the harsh environment of the sea, It was much harder for the sea race to procreate. But now, the sea race and the sea race in the modern realm could not be mentioned in the same breath. The Sea Lord's original form played a crucial role. But now, the Sea Lord's original form had undergone a new evolution to the level of the spirit. The sea race, who already had an advantage in physical strength, now had a qualitative leap in the spirit. This was truly shocking. Spiritual Master Qi. Wei Sun asked again, what about Jueming Island? Jueming Island also had the same discovery. Qi Xiao answered seriously. It's not just a part of the sea race. Wei Sun shook his head. It's all of them. He repeated, it's all of the sea race that has undergone a change. The Sea Lord's original form has undergone a fundamental change. I personally went to the bewildering world and fought with 3 sea race true monarchs. I personally checked thousands of sea race members and confirmed this. The battle between a human true monarch and a sea race true monarch was bound to be magnificent. Even if one could only imagine the scene and hear it, it was enough to shock people. However, this could not overshadow Wei Sun's conclusion. The Sea Lord's original form had undergone a fundamental change. Everyone was well aware of what it meant. This could be a great crisis that involved the entire human race. Because the human race's strength did not undergo a fundamental leap. What the Sea Lord's original form improved was the strength of every sea race member. When the opponent took a big step forward, not advancing was already retreating. Among the cultivators present, apart from the upper echelons of the fishing sea tower, only Yang Feng and Qi Xiao were expressionless. This was because they already knew about this before they came. They even came specifically for this. Compared to this, the life and death of Zhu Biqiong, Jiang Wang, and even Granny Bijou were so insignificant. Even if it was a matter of life and death for them, and they gave all their wisdom and courage, it was ultimately insignificant in the face of the entire ocean. I like young people, young geniuses, because they represent the future of the human race. They might be able to do things that we can't do in the future. Wei Sun changed the topic. But some geniuses indulge in love, and some geniuses are trapped in the struggle for power. It's a pity. The geniuses who truly fight for the human race and the overall situation are the future of the human race, and not just the future of the fishing sea tower. He raised his eyelids. Jitao, tell everyone about your investigation. Chen Jitao stepped onto the world's edge stage in such an atmosphere. Everyone stared at him in awe. His youth, his cultivation level, and his identity as the eldest disciple of the fishing sea tower were all important, but not to this extent. Instead, a true monarch expert was personally paving the way for him. What did the fishing sea tower expect of him? How high would this person's future be? Chapter 877. Wei Sun's words praised Chen Jitao again and again. In the hearts of discerning people, there is almost no suspense about the position of the future master of the fishing ocean tower. Not to mention that he had already reached the immortal ascension stage and had high prestige. Even if he had just entered the inner mansion, he was already dazzling enough with Wei Sun's attitude. No other disciple in the entire fishing ocean tower could enjoy this special honor. None of the disciples of the fishing ocean tower, including Yang Lu, showed any dissatisfaction. The gap between them and Chen Jitao was so big that they couldn't even have any thoughts of jealousy. Chen Jitao faced the gazes of so many cultivators present and the praise of a perfected cultivator. He still acted calmly. He didn't even have the slightest bit of joy. He wasn't someone who would amaze people at first sight. Many people didn't think of him when discussing Tianjiao, because he was too low-key and ordinary. Which Tianjiao didn't have a few famous deeds, but he seemed to be immersed in his work and was diligent. If not for his identity as the eldest disciple of the fishing ocean tower, he might not even be as famous as Jiang Wang in the offshore islands. But for some reason, not many people felt that he wasn't worthy of perfected cultivator Wei Sun's praise. He was like the solid earth and the vast sea. He was often overlooked, but he could bear everything. Chen Jitao cupped his hands and bowed. Then he said, I'm in charge of investigating the recent incidents of the sect protecting sea beasts losing control. I found that all the sea beasts lost control because of changes in their divine souls. The divine souls of those sea beasts all started to transform into their beast forms. The restrictions placed on them were all ineffective because of this. This wasn't a coincidence. I randomly checked hundreds of sea beasts that were still obedient and found that their divine souls had also started to change. There were no exceptions. This is enough evidence that the original form of the Sea Clan Sea Lord has undergone a qualitative change. But we don't know if it's a backup plan that was buried when the original form of the Sea Lord was formed and evolved over time, or a new peerless genius appeared in the Sea Clan and reformed the original form of the Sea Lord. With the bewildering world as an obstacle, it's difficult for us to find out the actual situation of the sea. But the main point of the offshore islands is that all the previous restrictions are useless against the sect protecting sea beasts. Everyone listened to him quietly. Reverend Chongguang, who had already returned to the Tianya stage, also nodded slightly. Disregarding everything else, Chun Jitao's steadiness had won his heart. In order to prevent the emergence of more uncontrollable sea beasts, it's imperative to change the restrictive spells as soon as possible. Chun Jitao said, I've come up with a brand new restrictive technique that targets the sea beast souls. During this period of time, I have personally suppressed 153 sea beasts that have gone out of control and changed the restrictions of 271 sea beasts that were on the verge of going out of control. After testing, none of the sea beasts went out of control under the new restrictions. The offshore islands are not the offshore islands of the sea fishing tower alone, but the offshore islands of everyone. It's our common home. He looked at everyone sincerely. Now, I'll share this Jinji method with everyone. I hope that everyone can eliminate the hidden danger as soon as possible. Jiang Wuyo raised her eyebrows. This was the crux of a show. The sea fishing tower was going to use its own unique restrictive spells to replace all the existing restrictive spells against sea beasts. This would further increase the sea fishing tower's influence in the offshore islands. Think about it. Every force that had a sect-protecting sea beast used the sea fishing tower's restrictive spells. How terrifying would such a subtle influence be? From the dragon bone boats completely replacing the other boats between the islands, the dragon coins and the saber coins fighting for the position of the mainstream currency, until the rapid innovation of the restrictive spells, the sea fishing tower had always been moving in one direction, to make the people of the offshore islands talk about the sea fishing tower. It was not a kingdom, but it was better than a kingdom. Many countries' imperial courts might not have the same influence as the sea fishing tower in the offshore islands. Following Chun Jitao's words, 10 disciples of the sea fishing tower stepped onto the horizon platform and stood in 2 rows. Each of them held a tray with a jade slip on it. Jiang Wang had used a similar jade slip to learn Dao techniques. Holding the jade slip and putting in one's thoughts, one could obtain the restrictive spells engraved on it. It was very convenient. The sea fishing tower does not charge any fees or set any conditions. If you need it, please help yourselves, Chun Jitao said sincerely, magnanimous and open. Jitao is right. The sea fishing tower is very responsible. Qi Xiao had Qi's support, so she was more confident. She spoke first. However, Jueming Island has also done research on the evolution of the Sea Lord's original form. The sea race is our common enemy. How can we let the sea fishing tower monopolize it? She also took out a jade slip and threw it casually. The jade slip floated above the horizon platform. This is a new restrictive spell that Jueming Island has researched. As the mighty lord of the eastern region, the Qi has innovated a lot of new Dao techniques. I don't think it's inferior to others in terms of restrictive spells. If you need it, you can use it for yourselves. She said that it was inferior to others, but what she meant was that the Qi's restrictive spells were much more powerful than those of the sea fishing tower. Otherwise, how could it be the mighty lord of the eastern region? Even if Wei Sun was here personally, Qi Xiao would still dare to say what she needed to say. This was the confidence of relying on Qi. Spiritual Master Chi's words are exactly what I want. Yang Feng also spoke up. Mog Valley's legacy is ancient, and it has a glorious history in terms of restrictive spells. It has never fallen behind when fighting against the sea race. He took out a jade slip and placed it next to Qi Zhao's jade slip. He laughed and said, Mog Valley has new restrictive spells as well. We're all doing this for the sake of the human race. Why don't you all learn and choose according to the situation? Yang Feng even hinted that Mog Valley's restrictive spells were passed down from the Su Kingdom. Of course, he also knew that Mog Valley's restrictive spells might not be comparable to those of Sea Fishing Tower and Jueming Island. However, he was smart enough to let everyone learn all three methods, helping those who did not have a faction imprint to avoid having to choose. Avoiding having to choose was the most beneficial for Mog Valley, which was the weakest of the three. It could be said that if Sea Fishing Tower's original goal was to expand its influence by innovating restrictive spells, then this plan would have been ruined. This was because Yang Feng and Qi Xiao had clearly made ample preparations. They had even come to the Horizon platform for this very moment. But why had Wei Sun come? Jiang Wuyo couldn't help but wonder. If it was only to promote the new restriction method, Reverend Cheng Wang would be enough to hold the fort. Why would Wei Sun come? She believed that Yang Feng and Qi Xiao wouldn't overlook this either. Although these two enlightened masters had immediately made their moves, the seriousness in their eyes hadn't dissipated in the slightest. Wei Sun watched quietly as Jueming Island and Mog Valley displayed their techniques. Instead of trying to stop them, he smiled and said, Enlightened Master Yang has a point. Why don't we all learn from him? We're all fighting against the sea race. Sometimes, there's no need to draw such clear distinctions. As soon as he spoke, many of the people present immediately relaxed. Many people immediately walked out and picked up jade slips to record the different restrictive spells of the three factions. They didn't want to offend any of these three factions. Of course, they didn't want to offend Sea Fishing Tower on the Horizon platform either. But, as the atmosphere calmed down, Wei Sun asked softly, Have you seen the true terror of Jueming Island and Mog Valley? Chapter 878. Qi Xiao and Yang Feng didn't make any eye contact, but both of them waited with solemn expressions. With Wei Sun's status, he definitely wouldn't exaggerate. He must have his reasons for saying so. What else could it be that was even more terrifying than the evolution of the Sea Lord's original form? The evolution of the Sea Lord's original form happened only recently. How could it be transmitted to all of the sea race in a single night? Have you all thought about this? Wei Sun continued to ask, putting aside what happened in the bewildering world. How did the Sea Tribe, which had been restricted in the territory of the human race, change? Yes, because the evolution of the Sea Lord's original form was so terrifying, it was overlooked. How the evolution of the original form was transmitted to the human territory was something they should be more vigilant about. It meant that the defense line that the human race had built over countless years might no longer be safe. Someone immediately asked, Did a traitor of the human race transmit something? Which traitor has such great ability and power to come into contact with all of the sea beasts in the nearby islands in such a short time? Yang Feng shook his head, unless it was Ocean Fishing Tower, Jueming Island, and Mog Valley. Of course, this was impossible. If the sea race had the ability to silently control any of these three forces, they would have broken through the bewildering world long ago. Qi Zhao's expression was solemn. Perhaps the Sea Lord's original form was created with a secret method to evolve, but it needed time to complete. And we just happened to arrive at this time. This was a possibility. The existence that had created the Sea Lord's original form was a legendary powerhouse with unfathomable power. No matter how unimaginable it wasn't impossible. Wei Sun shook his head lightly and stood up at this time. I'll let you see it with your own eyes. As soon as he finished speaking, Venerable Cheng Wang made a backhand grab and pulled out a gigantic bowl-shaped sea beast out of nowhere. Bang! It fell in the middle of the Horizon stage. This sea beast had a powerful aura and was at least the Sea Lord's original form. However, it was kneeling on the horizon stage and couldn't even roar. Wei Sun's calm gaze fell on this giant bull-shaped sea beast. Almost instantly, it became transparent. Its thick skin, muscles, blood, and organs all became transparent, as if they no longer existed. However, the aura that was still entrenched there told everyone that it was still alive and had not disappeared. After that, everyone saw that a lake had suddenly appeared on the spot. There was a small island in the middle of the lake, and there was a sea beast in the shape of a cow on the island. That was its sea of consciousness and soul, and it was actually so clearly displayed in everyone's field of vision. This was simply a miracle. The sea of consciousness and divine soul were both hidden deep within the body. Usually, they would collapse along with the destruction of the body. It was already not easy to see through the other party's physical body with the naked eye and observe their sea of consciousness and divine soul. What kind of method was it to drag the sea of consciousness and soul of such a sea beast into everyone's field of vision and let everyone see it clearly? But Wei Sun deliberately did this. Naturally, it was not purely to play a trick for these people to see. At this moment, he stretched out his hand and pointed his fingers at the bull-like sea beast soul. From the shape of this soul, it was obvious that the Sea Lord's original form had evolved to the level of divine soul. As soon as Wei Sun's palm touched it, the bull-like sea beast's divine soul suddenly trembled, and its whole body shook like a sieve. The sea of consciousness that was revealed instantly became turbulent. A storm suddenly rose, surging endlessly. The waves hit the small island in the middle, almost destroying it. Wei Sun's 5 fingers suddenly closed and straightened, and the bull-like sea of consciousness instantly calmed down. The surging sea of anger, just now, seemed to be just an illusion. Something even more mysterious happened. Under the control of some kind of power, the entire sea of consciousness, the sea that surrounded the island, had a thin layer that slowly rose and separated from a sea of consciousness. It was as if the sea of consciousness was divided into many layers, and now only one of them had been lifted. This layer of sea of consciousness penetrated the island, but it did not affect the integrity of the island. It seemed to have solidified into a mirror and finally stood upright behind the bull-like sea beast's divine soul. In the middle of the sea of consciousness was the island, and on the island was the sea beast's divine soul. Behind the sea beast's divine soul was an inverted sea of consciousness mirror. Everyone watched nervously and expectantly, and indeed, they were not disappointed. In the middle of the sea of consciousness mirror, a vertical eye suddenly opened. That vertical eye stared at the bull-like sea beast's divine soul without blinking. This scene was extremely strange. There was an eye that was always staring at the bull-like sea beast. It made it change. This vertical eye itself was strange, and the part of the eye that should be the white part was pitch black. The pupil part was replaced by 2 intersecting red lines. Suddenly, the intersecting red lines in the vertical eye trembled, and the vertical eye seemed to want to move its line of sight. Wei Sun's 5 fingers suddenly clenched into a fist, and the bull-like sea of consciousness and divine soul disappeared. Or to be more precise, the huge bull-like sea beast once again appeared in everyone's field of vision, and the scene that everyone had seen just now had been hidden. Why can the Sea Clan that has been tamed and restricted in the human territory still change? Wei Sun said, "This is the answer." Everyone present looked at each other, and were all frightened. Who did that eye belong to? It could cross the bewildering world and affect the sea beast in front of them. And it wasn't just one that was affected. The Sea Clan has produced an unparalleled expert, and his eyes can watch all the Sea Clan at the same time, no matter where they are. Yang Feng's voice was heavy. "Is this what you want to say? I don't know his name, and I don't know his fighting strength. For the time being, I call him 10,000 Eyes because his eyes can watch all the Sea Clan." Wei Sun said, "I discovered his existence a long time ago, and the way he watches is very hidden, and there aren't many Sea Clan members watching. At that time, The Sea Lord's original appearance hadn't changed, so it didn't attract my attention. I only thought that it was a way for an emperor to monitor his subordinates. It wasn't until the Sea Clan completed their transformation that I thought of him again. After carefully observing all the Sea Clan members, I found that without exception, they were all watched by him. His strength alone isn't terrifying, and no matter how strong he is, our human race will always have experts to fight against him. But he is lifting the entire Sea Clan up. If this continues, what will happen in the future? Wei Sun looked around and didn't say anything else. But everyone felt a bone-chilling coldness. The Sea Clan had produced such a terrifying expert. Lifting the entire race up, this was simply impossible. How many Sea Clan members had occupied the sea? Moreover, there were as many experts as there were clouds, and they had been fighting with the human race for countless years. Was it really possible for such a powerful race to make a leap with his own strength? If it was in the past, no one would believe it, even if the person who said this was Wei Sun. But the evolution of the Sea Lord's original appearance had become a reality. Chapter 879. Bewildering World, Dingwei Area. A sea beast that looked like a giant elephant was slowly moving forward. It had a pair of snow-white tusks, 2 door-like ears, a long nose, and 4 thick limbs. If it weren't for the sharp and hideous bone spurs on its back and the streamlined fins on both sides, it would have looked exactly like an elephant. In the right ear of this thorn elephant, a handsome young man with a sword sat cross-legged. Of course, this was just an illusion created by the Mirage King's Pearl. The left ear of the thorn elephant, where Jiang Wang's real body was, looked empty. It was actually covered by the Mirage King's Pearl. With the level of the spirit concealment snake, it was doubtful whether he could control the Sea Clan. After the evolution of the Sea Lord's true form, it was even more impossible. However, it was still possible to swallow a few sea beasts that had no intelligence and replace them. Jiang Wang had already divided out 34 spirit concealment snakes to control different sea beasts and patrol the area he had designated. With the sea beasts as the first layer of cover, he could seize the initiative in the battle with Granny Bijou. Jiang Wang, who was sitting in the left ear of the thorn elephant, held a small dressing mirror in his hand and immersed his mind in observing. After passing the flying snow tribulation, he could be said to have truly developed the various functions of the red makeup mirror, such as the illusion and the observation ability. Of course, the most important thing now was the strengthening of his spirit after passing the tribulation. After passing the overturning sea tribulation, the red makeup mirror's observation range had increased from 5 miles to 50 miles. After passing the questioning heart tribulation, the observation range did not increase, but the observation ability was enhanced. In the past, the red makeup mirror reflected everything in front of Jiang Wang's eyes. Things that Jiang Wang could not see clearly with the naked eye could not be seen through the red makeup mirror. Now, the red makeup mirror had already helped Jiang Wang distinguish the details. Things that could not be seen clearly with the naked eye could be seen more clearly through the red makeup mirror's perspective. However, there was no accurate way to measure how much the observation ability had improved. However, Jiang Wang himself was more concerned about another advancement. Now, he no longer needed to enter the mirror world to control the various functions of the red makeup mirror. In fact, Jiang Wang rarely chose to enter the red makeup mirror to observe the outside world. It was because it was too dangerous for his physical body to reside in the mirror world. Once the red makeup mirror was shattered, the body would be destroyed along with it. Although his physical body could jump out at any time, there was still a process. No matter how short it was, there was still the possibility of being caught. Now it was much safer. He only needed to hold the red makeup mirror to observe his surroundings. Jiang Wang used the red makeup mirror to observe the outside world under the cover of the thorny elephant's left ear. 50 miles was not a long distance for the cultivators of the outer tower, but Jiang Wang was able to gain the upper hand in dealing with high zooming with the red makeup mirror, so it would not be useless against Granny Bijou. The only problem was that when he held the red makeup mirror and observed the environment within 50 square kilometers directly, he felt a vague stinging in his soul. Of course, it wasn't intense. It was barely bearable. Vaguely, there was the sound of a woman crying. It wasn't very obvious and didn't appear often, but did appear before. Jiang Wang was well aware that this was the result of his soul origin being strengthened multiple times. If it was the old Hongzhuang mirror, the pain would not be as simple as just a piercing pain. Just the sound of her crying was enough to make him suffer. It was not impossible for his soul origin to collapse because of it. The more familiar Jiang Wang was with the red makeup mirror, the more he knew that the red makeup mirror was not a treasure with great fortune. On the contrary, it carried deep resentment and was engraved with stubborn curses. Why did he need to enter the mirror world with his physical body before he could use some of its functions? It was actually a kind of protection for the user of the red makeup mirror. When a user was in the mirror world, the mirror world itself would isolate some negative effects. After entering the mirror world with his physical body, what was hidden in the vast fog outside the range of his exploration had yet to be discovered. However, the red makeup mirror itself was not a treasure with great fortune. However, the use of an artifact depended on the user. Whether it was a resentment artifact or a fortune artifact depended on who was using it. Hu Xiaoming used the red makeup mirror, but he still died. Jiang Wang had the red makeup mirror, but he had used it to escape many times. Because of the negative effects of the red makeup mirror, Jiang Wang had to stop every once in a while to cleanse his soul before entering the mirror to observe again. It was not that he couldn't force himself to continue, but if he weakened himself to observe it, the gains would not make up for the losses. When he stopped, he would explore the inner mansion and cultivate diligently. Under normal circumstances, his choice would be to complete the cleansing as soon as possible and stay away from Granny Bijou. After all, there was a gap between their combat strength. However, for Jiang Wang, he would never let Granny Bijou go. At the same time, from a practical point of view, Granny Bijou's greed for him was uncontrollable. He wanted to avoid her, but she would not let him, so he had to make the first move. In terms of pure combat strength, he was certainly no match for Granny Bijou. However, a battle was not something that could be decided by comparing realms. A child with a knife could also kill an adult with a sneak attack. Now that he was fully equipped, as long as he took the initiative, he might be able to kill this old woman. To a certain extent, this was actually a competition of patience. Granny Bijou waited near the floating island, while Jiang Wang waited in the outer circle for the person who could not wait for the rabbit to leave. Jiang Wang might not win in terms of patience, but he had another advantage, which was his fine control of his Tao essence, which allowed him to resist the mutation longer than cultivators of the same realm. That was the fine control that he had honed through fighting against the perfected ones of the present age. As a result, even if Granny Bijou waited patiently until the last day she predicted, Jiang Wang could still hold on for one more day. He would definitely win the wait, and this would be the first step to his victory. Life was a game after game. Some people won, and some lost. It was the same for the whole race and the whole world. For countless years, it should be said that the human race had firmly held the upper hand. After all, the sea race was chased to the sea back then, and after crossing two great eras, they still could not fight back. The sea race gradually evolved into their current form in a difficult environment. Although they were stronger than before, this forced adaptation was proof of failure. They could have lived in the rich and peaceful world of the modern world, cruising in the tranquil coastal waters, and wandering in the clear and bright rivers. Now, they had to face all kinds of life and death crises in the harsh sea. But then again, the sea race had not gone extinct yet, and would continue to exist for a long time in the foreseeable future. This was also proof of their strength. The human race was supported by generations of Tianjiao, and the sea race also had generations of powerhouses who worked hard to turn the tide. The sea race's sages who once created the original form of the Sea Lord were like this. Now, the sea race's powerhouse who always watched all the sea race and supported the rise of the sea race was also like this. Or rather, Gao Jia, Gao, Not only did the human race know nothing about him, but there were also not many sea race members who truly understood him. Wei Sun gave him a name Wanli, and his real name was Gao Jie. Lying in the deepest part of the sea, he watched every sea race member with billions of eyes that were constantly growing and dying. Chapter 880. Gao Swamps Rivers. Everything, everything. Omniscience meant omniscience. Omniscience meant omnipotence. Wherever there was water, Gao was omniscient. Wherever there was water, Gao was omnipotent. This was what he emphasized, and it was what he wanted the world to remember. Azure, the warehouse of water, was the warehouse that produced food, feeding billions of creatures. But the Azure Sea with this beautiful name was not beautiful in itself. Perhaps it was beautiful a long time ago, but at least in the era when records were passed down, it was already so bad. Yes, it could be described as bad. Perhaps this description was more appropriate. The Azure Sea was indeed the warehouse of water, but the billions of creatures that lived here were the food of the Azure Sea. The Azure Sea was like a greedy beast, swallowing the lives of countless creatures. The frequent soul annihilation tsunami, the vortex of eternal darkness that appeared irregularly, the world-destroying thunder that swept across thousands of miles. There were too many dangers. Although the Azure Sea was boundless and could carry billions of creatures, there were very few places where they could safely rest. The sea race had never stopped exploring the Azure Sea, but they often could not find a new pure land even after hundreds or thousands of years. So why was it that even though the sea race had a hard time reproducing and their war potential was far inferior to the human race, they were so keen on fighting in the bewildering world? Because they were too eager to return to the modern world, and also because the Azure Sea did not have so many resources. Dying in the bewildering world was better than dying in the Azure Sea. In the deepest part of the Azure Sea, there was a long mountain range. But the occasional rise and fall told others that this was not a dead mountain range, but some kind of huge living creature. Close observation, perhaps it should be a dragon, because its body was so slender, with horns at the highest point and a tail at the furthest point. But it was very different from the dragons that were passed down in the modern world. Not to mention the fierce bone spurs on its body, not to mention the 2 long whiskers that were as sharp as swords. Not to mention the scales on its body. Where the scales were supposed to be, there were vertical pupils. The whites of the eyes were pitch black, and the pupils were blood-red lines that crossed each other. These vertical pupils were all over the dragon's body. Some were open, some were closed. New eyes were constantly being born. He was Gao Jie. He had not moved from this place for many years. This was because beneath his mountain-like body was a gigantic vortex of eternal darkness. As soon as he left, all the living beings within 10,000 miles of the sea would be devoured. This was the largest eternal darkness vortex that the sea race had discovered in the past 10,000 years. That was because this region of the sea was a rare habitat for the sea race. It was a flourishing place for the sea race. Gao Jie used his body to suppress it, allowing it to continue. After so many years, this sea had become even more prosperous. Not many members of the sea race knew that if Tian Gaojie made a comeback, they would all die. In the bewildering world, there was the self-detonation of the soul of a soldier-level member of the Sea Clan, and the pain of a commander-level member of the Sea Clan on the Tianya stage in the offshore islands. But there was no reaction. He had to process countless pieces of information all the time, so these 2 pieces of information were nothing. However, the commander of the sea race seemed to have encountered something strange. Just as he was about to split his consciousness to take a look, it was unfortunately quickly extinguished. He didn't know who it was. He thought so with a millionth of a thought. But soon, even this idea was used for other purposes. This was because it didn't matter who it was. In this difficult environment, the sea folk had too many important things to do. His every thought was very precious to him. The future of the sea folk. There was a voice that seemed to be saying, the future of the sea folk, but that voice was too far away. Gao Jie let out a long breath, bringing with it a series of huge bubbles. In a trance, he He didn't know how many years had passed. Although the outer tower wouldn't go out to sea, the army stationed in the bewildering world couldn't all be outer tower cultivators. The soldiers formed a military formation to protect themselves and interspersed with a few outer tower cultivators to guide the way, so they wouldn't get lost. Of course, if they were unfortunately lost, they could only be unlucky. Jiang Wang had been waiting for nearly 2 days and 2 nights outside the floating island. Granny Bijou was very patient and didn't appear. Or maybe she didn't choose to wait near the floating island at all, but directly went to hunt the sea race. But it didn't matter. Even if it was the latter possibility, as an outer tower cultivator, she still needed to return to the floating island to recuperate. However, with starlight protecting their bodies, outer tower cultivators could resist the mutation for a longer time. He didn't know how long Granny Bijou could last, but she would definitely last longer than him. While waiting for the ambush, many distracting thoughts were born. For example, would Granny Bijou have already left? Was there any meaning in waiting like this? How long could Zhu Biqiong last on the Tianya stage? Jiang Wang cut off all these thoughts. He firmly believed that he had already made the best choice, and the rest could only be left to the will of heaven. When making any decision, the most taboo thing was to be indecisive. He waited patiently and determinedly. It was fine as long as he cultivated and worked hard in silence. Every time his strength increased, his chances of winning would increase a little. The speed at which the 3,000 hidden snakes explored the inner mansion was very impressive. Before the second long night in the ambush was about to pass, the pitch-black hidden snake suddenly slithered back and forth in a room that extended from the inner mansion. It was very excited. Jiang Wang's consciousness directly descended through this hidden snake and touched a new secret treasure. This wasn't the first secret treasure he found in the second inner mansion. Secret treasure, Wind Chaser. Its effect was to increase one's speed by 10% for a quarter of an hour, including the speed of attacking and the speed of movement. It was still not the secret treasure he wanted the most. He actually still wanted the second secret treasure to be related to the fire element. It was better to focus on 2 sticks than to focus on 1 sword. Instead of strengthening everything a little, it was better to directly focus on the fire element's killing power. If he could burn a city like Zhuo Guang's blazing flame flower, why would he need the assistance of other Taoist techniques? The previous times he gave up on the secret treasure were all for this reason. But this time he didn't hesitate and directly chose to control it. When the battle was approaching, it would be delaying himself if he pursued perfection. Every additional point of combat power was a point. Moreover, the effect of the Wind Chaser was excellent and very suitable for battle. In the past 2 days, he had gained control of another 17 sea beasts. However, the total number of sea beasts under his control was only 44. Some of them were killed by the human cultivators who came out of the floating island. The others were killed by the passing sea race. Jiang Wang didn't stop them and killed them. The range he chose was too large, and he couldn't take care of all the positions by himself. He could only choose the most likely route of the human cultivators based on his observations during this period of time, and then use the perspective of these giant sea beasts to help him observe. Even so, he couldn't be sure that he could find Granny Bijou. Fortunately, most of the cultivators on the floating island traveled in groups. Only he and Granny Bijou were on this trip to wash away their sins, so no one would help them. With Wei Sun's order, no one dared to do so. They only needed to keep an eye on the lone cultivators, which undoubtedly greatly narrowed the range. The only thing Jiang Wang was sure of was that the old woman must want to kill him and take the treasure. She didn't hesitate to sacrifice the children she raised from childhood to seize resources. Now that everything had to start from scratch, there was no reason for her not to target him. This was the reason why he insisted on waiting. When people plot against the tiger also plots against people. He just didn't know whether the person would skin the tiger or the tiger would eat the person in the end. Chapter 881. 2 days ago, on the World's Edge stage, Wei Sun directly dug into the deepest part of the sea-beast connection. He used his great ability to remove the concealment, allowing everyone on the stage to see the eyes of the sea race's terrifying powerhouse. At the same time, they also realized the danger lurking in the near future. The terrifying existence that Wei Sun called Wan Run was truly frightening. Of course, the sea race was a powerful opponent. But deep down, most human cultivators didn't think that the sea race had any chance of counterattacking. Human cultivators had a sense of superiority over the sea race. In the Middle Ages, the human emperor was able to chase the dragon emperor. As time passed, the story might repeat itself. The path of cultivation was developing with each passing day. What the ancients could do, the people of today could do as well. Over the years, the biggest crisis in the sea territory was because the Sioux kingdom, which had unified the eastern region, was suddenly destroyed, and a large number of troops were transferred to the sea territory. As a result, the defense line at the sea territory was empty, which gave the sea tribe a chance. But that time, the overlords didn't even have to take action. The human cultivators spontaneously sent 2,300 people to the sea in a single day, directly pushing the sea race back to the bewildering world. This also established the current situation of the coastal islands. The sea race couldn't be underestimated, but the human race was the ruler of the world. The word human was capable of supporting mountains, reversing tides, and standing indomitable. But now, the sea race seemed to have undergone a fundamental change in their cultivation, or perhaps they had already ushered in a great leap forward. This time, the human race seemed to be lagging behind. Xianwei Banner, General Yang Feng, immediately said, "This matter is of great importance. I must return to Ho Valley immediately. Please make a decision." Qi Shao didn't appear to be in a hurry, but she also said, "If this Wanren you speak of can really make the sea race rise, he will indeed be a great threat to the human race. He must be killed. I must report back to the imperial court and come up with a plan as soon as possible." "No hurry." Wei Sun pressed his hand down, asking them to stop for a moment. "The waves of the blue sea are fierce. Wanren hides in the deep sea and has a great influence on the sea race. If we want to kill him, we must destroy the sea race. This isn't something that can be done in a hurry. If we act in haste, we may be implicated." Yang Feng and Qi Shao both realized that the problem raised by Wei Sun wasn't simple. How could a powerhouse at the level of a true monarch just simply raise a problem? He must have his own way of dealing with it. Of course, such a response was sound in the grand scheme of things, but it wasn't necessarily a good thing for Mog Valley and Zhueming Isle. Therefore, they all tacitly wanted to withdraw as soon as possible. They wanted to let higher-level experts communicate with Wei Sun so that their own forces would not be at a disadvantage. Perfected beings were not confident enough to deal with perfected monarchs. But Wei Sun had suddenly made an appearance and brought out such earth-shattering news for the sake of gaining the upper hand. So how could he be willing to let them go so easily? The most important question now is not anything else. Instead, it was because the oceanic race had made an overall leap in strength and obtained a practical advantage. We need to reconstruct our defense line and quickly adjust our strategy so that we can react as quickly as possible. Time waits for no man. For every breath we waste here, one more soldier in the bewildering world might be sacrificed. However, with the current situation of the nearby islands being in a state of disunity, we can't quickly respond, much less compare to the Sea Clan that is being watched by Wan Tao. 10,000 clones had billions of thoughts, and they knew every single member of the sea race with a single thought. What about us? For so many years, we have been doing things our own way and even fighting with each other. Why is it that we, the human race, have such a strong army and have such a difficult time in the bewildering world for so many years? So much so that today, the sea race has a chance to rise? Because we are in a state of disunity. We have to make a change. Otherwise, the sea race will break through the bewildering world and enter the nearby seas again. We will all become the sinners of the human race. After a series of foreshadowing, Wei Sun finally spoke of his grand plan. In view of the critical situation, I believe that it is necessary to truly unify the forces of the people of the sea and twist everyone into a rope, a fist. Only in this way can we give the sea race a head-on blow. I have decided to personally take the lead and establish the Sea Suppression Alliance, unifying the forces of all the people of the sea, gathering a torrential momentum, and working together as one to protect the sea border. Wei Sun took the opportunity of gathering the heads of various forces in this sea worship ceremony to personally enter the scene and directly announce the unification of all the major forces in the nearby islands. Before this, he actually did not reveal anything. The forces in the nearby islands, after so many years of development, had long been intertwined. For example, Huaying Palace had a general affairs emissary like Lu Hua in the Fishing Sea Tower. How could a major event that involved unifying the forces of all the people of the nearby islands be hidden from the other two forces? But the Fishing Sea Tower really did it. Such a major event that was almost impossible to completely hide actually went to this step without anyone knowing. The only explanation was that this plan of the Fishing Sea Tower was only carried out by the elders and above, and only the elders who could be completely trusted knew about it. And among the disciples, probably only disciples like Chun Jitao knew about it. Those forces that were going to actively join the Sea Suppression Alliance, perhaps only the leaders of the sects knew about it. Only then could it explain how it could be done without anyone knowing. The internal struggle between the elders and the arrogance of the young people. How could it be worth Wei Sun's involvement? Unifying the nearby islands as soon as he made a move, this was the true style of a perfected cultivator. Once Wei Sun succeeded, the Sea Suppression Alliance that unified the forces of all the people of the sea would immediately expand into a force that would not lose to the strong countries in the world, and even have the qualifications to enter the eastern region and compete with Qi. Even if the Sea Suppression Alliance unified all the people of the sea, it would not be comparable to Qi. But in the eastern region that Qi had dominated for many years, were there any countries that were uneasy with Qi? Were there any forces that were dissatisfied with Qi? Those forces that had their ambitions suppressed and resentment deeply hidden. Those forces that could only wait day after day to be nibbled away. If the Sea Suppression Alliance that was unprecedentedly powerful on the sea took the lead, would these forces have the opportunity to unite and challenge Qi? Moreover, wouldn't the Jing country in the central region and the Mu country in the northern region be happy to see this happen? Didn't the extremely powerful Mu country in the past also fall apart overnight, and the royal bloodline was cut off? No wonder Gu Huaixin could not hold back and almost put the internal competition of the Fishing Sea Tower on the table. In such a grand future, his ranking represented an astronomical amount of resources. How could he not fight for it? Even if he did not want to fight for it himself, the forces around him would push him to fight for it. Therefore, framing Hai Jinping and seizing Chongji Island were just small steps in Gu Huaixin's fight for the right to speak. To others, it was shocking, but it was just a small part of Gu Huaixin's plan. No wonder Hai Jinping, as a guardian elder, tolerated Granny Bijou again and again. For Su Xiangwan, the current perfected master behind Hai Jinping, keeping his current ranking was the biggest gain. If he really went all out, he who was ranked third in the Fishing Sea Tower might not be able to suppress Gu Huaixin, who had recently made a breakthrough. As for Granny Bijou's plan to kill Jiang Wang, it was just a small move she made with the help of the actions of the faction behind her. At the critical moment of the whole faction's competition, if she could seize enough benefits, she might be able to seize the opportunity to become a god. However, she did not expect that this small move would turn the boat upside down. Zhu Biqiang, who was supposed to be dead and completely abandoned, was actually forced to struggle for a chance by a guy from Qi. As the vanguard of Gu Huaixin's faction, Granny Bijou was directly thrown into the bewildering world. Wei Sun, the head of the Fishing Sea Tower, directly announced the failure of Gu Huaixin's plan to fight for power this time. For Gu Huaixin, his loss was far from being compensated by Chongji Island. However, These were all internal matters of the fishing sea tower. In terms of the overall situation of the sea, once the Sea Suppression Alliance was established, it was equivalent to redividing the forces of the entire offshore islands. The fishing sea tower, which led the establishment of the Sea Suppression Alliance, would become the absolute ruler of the offshore islands. Maggio and Jueming Island would have to be moved aside. This was something that Yang Feng and Qi Xiao could not tolerate. They came personally to stop the fishing sea tower from expanding their influence through the frequent riots of the guardian sea beasts. However, they did not expect that this was still a smokescreen. The real purpose of the fishing sea tower was the Sea Suppression Alliance. They used the sea worship ceremony to cover up the new restriction method, and used the new restriction method to cover up the establishment of the Sea Suppression Alliance. As a result, they caught Maggio and Jueming Island off guard. How long had the fishing sea tower been secretly preparing before this? Jueming Island believes that this matter still needs to be discussed. Qi Xiao deliberated and said, "It is not impossible to establish the Sea Suppression Alliance. It is also urgent to deal with the changes of the sea race. However, how to establish it, how to take on more responsibilities, and how to deal with the sea race. These all need to be discussed." Enlightened masters naturally lowered their heads in front of a perfected lord. Even if they had reason, they would lose some of their momentum. This was also why the fishing sea tower had not leaked any information beforehand, and why Wei Sun had launched a surprise attack. The situation is so critical. How can we have time for discussion? It's not like you didn't see that Wang Jian just now. Wei Sun suppressed her objection and said to the crowd, "Why do I want to establish the Sea Suppression Alliance? Because the coastal archipelago is the coastal archipelago of our people. We're the ones fighting the sea race day and night. Would other people really feel the pain of it? What happened to Maggio back then? Didn't their coastal army retreat at will? We have to rely on ourselves." Lord Perfected Lord, Yang Feng could no longer remain silent. Maggio has never given in for thousands of years. Forgive me for being disrespectful, but do you think the number of Maggio cultivators who have died in battle is less than that of the fishing sea tower? That's right. Maggio is great and mighty. Maggio and our offshore islands have long since become one. Our people recognize Maggio. However, the Sioux kingdom that unified the eastern region in the past only had your lone army left in the sea border. Even your ancestors stayed behind because they disobeyed orders, didn't they? In the end, outsiders have more important things to do, but for us, defending our borders is the most important thing. Wei Sun spoke of the Maggio while insinuating Qi. After suppressing Yang Feng's voice, he spoke again to the crowd on the world's edge stage. "I think you all need to know that the Sea Suppression Alliance was established to deal with the sea race, not to take over anything. On the contrary, the Sea Suppression Alliance will only provide you with the greatest support. It will only help you grow stronger as soon as possible. First of all, I have personally adjusted the restriction technique created by Fishing Sea Tower's disciple Chen Jitao. It can block Wang Jian's gaze and truly ensure the safety of your sex guardian sea beasts. You won't have to worry about the future. Without a doubt, this was something that Maggio and Jueming Island restriction techniques couldn't do. It wasn't that they didn't have the ability. It was because they hadn't discovered Wang Jian's existence in advance, so they didn't know where to start. It was too late to compete with Fishing Sea Tower now. Without a doubt, everyone would choose Fishing Sea Tower's restriction technique. Because of this miscalculation, Maggio and Jueming Island's preparations were completely useless. However, Fishing Sea Tower didn't just rely on this to expand their influence. Second, Wei Sun continued, "Fishing Sea Tower's secret technique treasury will be open to all members of the Sea Suppression Alliance. As long as you have enough contribution points, you can exchange for at will. You can even exchange for a chance to receive my personal guidance. Enlightened Master Chong will explain the specific details later." Opening up Fishing Sea Tower's secret technique treasury was another earth-shattering decision. It couldn't be done without a big heart. The details of contribution points and exchange hadn't been fully revealed yet. However, it was obvious that Fishing Sea Tower had absolute confidence in controlling the members of the alliance. Third, your sects and forces will remain independent, and your positions will remain unchanged. In other words, you won't lose anything. You can also receive an extra salary from the Sea Suppression Alliance. However, to better mobilize the power of the Sea People, we will set up a special meeting within the Sea Suppression Alliance. The leaders of all sects will participate and discuss strategies to resist the Sea Race. Everything will be for the big picture. Everyone, we aren't working together. We're just working together to fight against the Sea Race, just like what our ancestors did in the past. Now, Wei Sun opened his hand, and a scroll appeared in front of everyone on the Tianya stage, floating in the air. If you're willing to join the Sea Suppression Alliance, you could just write your name on this contract. Let the souls of the heroes who returned from the bewildering world witness our determination to fight for the human race. If you're not willing, Fishing Sea Tower won't force you. You can leave now. He said that he wouldn't force anyone and would let them go. However, when most of the forces in the offshore islands joined the Sea Suppression Alliance, how could the forces outside the Sea Suppression Alliance survive? Since Tower Master Wei has put it this way, how can we not agree? Of course, the Nine Mysteries sect is willing. How can we be indecisive in such a dangerous situation? The establishment of the Sea Suppression Alliance is great news, and we'll definitely support it. It's our duty to resist the Sea Race. Let's work together to resist the Sea Race. Dozens of people shouted one after another, and the momentum was great. One after another, scrolls flew up, and the atmosphere on the Tianya stage was instantly filled. The Sea Race's strength had increased, and this was a clear fact. Resisting the Sea Race was the human race's general trend. On the surface, joining the Sea Suppression Alliance was a win-win situation. Clearly, Fishing Sea Tower had made many preparations in secret for today. Even when they couldn't do anything about Chi's invasion, they were just trying to numb the situation. It was hard to know how long they had planned in secret, how much they had paid, and how many people they had convinced. However, those with eyes and ears could see and hear. Now that the alliance was established on the Tianya stage, it was simply a call to action. At this time, only Mog Valley, Jueming Island, and the forces that were clearly under them had not expressed their stance. Most of the forces that were originally neutral had already expressed their preference. The establishment of the Sea Suppression Alliance was irresistible. It could even be said that at this moment, the Sea Suppression Alliance had been established. This was because it had received the approval of most of the forces in the offshore islands. Wei Sun looked at Yang Feng and Qi Xiao. The two of you represent Mog Valley and Jueming Island. Why don't you make your stance clear? His voice was still calm, and his eyes were still calm. However, the world had changed in an instant. He added, or be a witness. The meaning was clear. You can either join the Sea Suppression Alliance or watch the establishment of the Sea Suppression Alliance. You will be kicked out of the Sea People's Circle. There was no other choice. 2 updates are not 1. No updates tonight. Chapter 882. Granny Bijou had been waiting outside the only floating island in Dingwei District for 3 days and 3 nights. Although there was no sun in the bewildering world, there was still day and night. The day was a vast expanse of white, and the night was a vast expanse of night. Inner mansion cultivators couldn't resist the effects of mutation after 2 days and had to return to the island to recuperate. Even those who plucked the divine power seeds could only last for 3 days at most, with the inner mansion illuminating divine power. After all, without the protection of starlight, they couldn't resist the mutation for too long. However, 3 days and 3 nights had passed, and she still hadn't found her target. Her little fishes had already quietly swum around the entire floating island. Once she found him, she would immediately attack with lightning speed. There was no way Jiang Wang could sneak in. She maintained her greatest patience and didn't leave. However, she still didn't get the best result. Although Dingwei District was only one of the many known districts in the bewildering world, it was still thousands of miles wide. It was undoubtedly very difficult to find a person in such a large area, especially when the sea rays could interfere at any time. That was why she chose to wait on the floating island in the beginning. That was the best choice. However, it was meaningless to talk about this now. After all, Jiang Wang hadn't appeared. Her judgment was wrong. Now there were 4 possibilities. First, Jiang Wang had completed his cleansing and left the bewildering world. This possibility was very small. It was impossible for her to kill 1,000 commander-level sea race commanders in 3 days. Secondly, in order to avoid fighting with him, Jiang Wang had run to another area. The possibility of this was not very high because the journey was long. Perhaps before he reached his destination, he would have already mutated. Third, Jiang Wang had a way to avoid the effects of mutation. Then, he should still be in the process of searching for the sea race. Although in her experience, such a method didn't exist, she had a big family and a big business. He might have a unique method that he didn't want to reveal to others. The fourth possibility was that Jiang Wang's physique was extraordinary and his control of his Tao energy was exquisite. He could resist the mutation for a longer period of time. Under such circumstances, the best choice was for him to complete the mission and leave. There was no other way. Even if it was like looking for a needle in a haystack, she could only search now. He could only hope that Jiang Wang had not left. Things were really not going well for him. He had wanted to use the opportunity of the faction's advancement to win enough resources for himself to become a god. But in the end, he had lost completely. He could only search for a needle in a haystack in a bewildering world. Granny Bijou thought and made a hand seal. The little fish that were hiding around the floating island as eyes swam out in all directions. In the bewildering world, these small fishes could easily encounter danger. The loss was painful, but if they could capture Jiang Wang, everything would be fine. A frog-like sea beast with a big belly, bulging face, green skin, and red eyes leaped high into the air and landed after leaping dozens of feet. The protruding red eyes rolled left and right as if they were wandering aimlessly, but they never went beyond a general range. It had a pair of buffalo-like curved horns on its head. It was the mount of that bald-headed member of the sea race. Later on, it was captured by Jiang Wang when it was fleeing. In the red eyes, a white-haired old lady appeared. She was walking slowly with a cane. It had an instinctive urge to swallow, but it did not understand that it was no match for the thin and weak opponent in front of it. However, the black snake hiding in its body saw it clearly. It found the target. The black snake immediately released its control over the frog-like sea beast. Then, it leaped high into the air and started sprinting from a distance. It suppressed the sound of the wind and rushed toward the thin old lady. While it was still in the air and had yet to land, a small bright red fish swam in front of it. Compared to the size of the red-eyed horned frog, this fish, which was less than the size of a palm, was indeed petite. However, the small bright red fish only swung its tail and plunged into the frog-like sea beast's left eye. It swallowed its ruby-like eye and drilled into its body. The frog-like sea beast had just opened its mouth. Before it could scream, it had already fallen. Not long after it fell, it struggled to stand up again. Blood was still dripping from its empty left eye, but it had already turned around and obediently allowed the white-haired old lady to slowly walk over and stand on its body. It staggered forward. At first, it was a little stiff, but slowly it became proficient. No one else could see this strange scene. However, a black snake was slowly dissipating in its body. Jiang Wang, who was hiding in the distance, opened his eyes and saw Granny Bijou. She was now more than 50 miles away and was not within the range of the red makeup mirror. However, based on the compass and the speed of the frog-like sea beast, he could roughly estimate the range of Granny Bijou's travel. With a thought, the remaining 37 sea beasts gathered together. A few of them had accidentally died earlier. He had observed carefully in the bamboo building. At that time, he had felt that the old lady's fish was extraordinary. The fact that it could instantly kill a reaching heaven state sea beast was just a confirmation of his judgment. Granny Bijou was good at controlling beasts. She was responsible for taming many of the sea beasts, protecting the sea fishing tower. Of course, these sea beasts could not cause any real harm to Granny Bijou, but they could at least distract her a little. The road to the final victory was built up bit by bit. There was a real gap between the 2 mansions' magical power and the 4 mansions' magical power. He had won the weight, but this was only the first step. Jiang Wang thought for a while, then jumped out of the ear-piercing elephant and landed in front of a nearby boulder. This boulder was pushed over by the sea beast he controlled. The boulder would be moved by the rules of the bewildering world, so it was difficult to fix. He helped it to position itself, forcibly creating an advantageous position. He worked together with the ear-piercing elephant to move the boulder until it reached a satisfactory landing spot. Judging from the direction Granny Bijou was heading, she would definitely pass by here. Since the bewildering world's directions were reversed, it was impossible to be too accurate. However, with the compass, he could make a rough judgment. Then, he let the ear-piercing elephant wander around while he hid on the boulder. He covered himself with the pearl of the Clam King and the red makeup mirror and continued to wait. Although Granny Bijou was about to fall into an ambush, the scene of the frog-like sea beast being controlled in an instant made him decide to be more cautious. Granny Bijou's beast-taming ability made him feel that his decision to hide in the ear-piercing elephant was not the safest choice. He held the red makeup mirror and observed through the mirror's perspective. He could see everything within 50 miles. So far, when he used the red makeup mirror to observe his opponent, he had only been vaguely detected by Qian Xiang once in Qingyang Town. But that was because he had the peerless flying sword, the dragon light shooting duel, which had a spirit and warned him. Even Ying Guan, who was good at hiding, had been detected by Qian Xiang before. For example, Hai Zoming did not notice that he was spied on by the red makeup mirror. Moreover, now that he had passed the overturning the sea and the questioning heart tribulations, Jiang Wang was very confident in the red makeup mirror. After silently counting in his heart for about 3 minutes, the jumping figure of the frog-like sea beast appeared in the red makeup mirror. The empty, I had stopped bleeding, and the remaining, I had a dull look in its eyes. Between the 2 curved horns, the white-haired old woman stood with her cane. Jiang Wang had already removed the rattan chair that the sea race had been sitting on earlier and repaired the traces to prevent others from seeing the problem. When Hong Zhuang looked into the mirror, she immediately discovered the problem. The white-haired old woman, standing with her cane, was just an illusion. The water droplet behind her was Granny Bijou herself. If Jiang Wang did not use the red makeup mirror to check first, he might have lost the initiative in the surprise attack. Chapter 883. The red-eyed, frog-like sea beast finally approached and saw the thorny elephant with its single dull eye. The 2 controlled sea beasts met head-on. The thorny elephant let out a long moo and charged forward. The difference between sea beasts and the Sea Clan was like the difference between beasts and humans. The 2 were fundamentally different. Before the Sea Clan entered the sea beasts were the masters of the sea. It was not the rumor that sea beasts could take on a human form and advance into the Sea Clan after cultivating to a certain extent. The 2 were not even of the same clan. In the end, it was just a rumor that deliberately tarnished the Sea Clan's name. If Jiang Wang had entered the bewildering world through normal channels, someone would have informed him of this information in advance. However, he was banished to the bewildering world to clear his name. Time was short, and Reverend Chong Guang was obviously not in the mood to talk nonsense with him. Compared to Granny Bijou, what he lacked was more than just guidance. This was also the reason why he did not act rashly when he entered the bewildering world and chose to stop and familiarize himself with the environment. See, beasts that had yet to develop intelligence were like this. They did not think, only instincts. If they were hungry, they would search for food. If they were afraid, they would flee. The thorny elephant strode forward with its thick elephant legs, like a small mountain, crushing everything. The red-eyed frog did not move. Granny Bijou, who was standing on the frog's head, flicked her finger. A small red fish darted out like lightning, drawing an agile arc and accurately drilling into the thorny elephant's long trunk. Just like the red-eyed frog, the thorny elephant fell down with a loud bang. This time, through the red makeup mirror, Jiang Wang saw the small red fish's appearance clearly. It had thin scales, sharp teeth, a long tail, and was extremely fast and ferocious. Jiang Wang lay in ambush and did not move, maintaining his greatest patience. However, the 37 sea beasts he controlled had already formed an encirclement. They accelerated together and rushed toward the ambush point. The sea beasts were generally large in size. When they closed in from all directions, there was naturally a terrifying pressure. However, Granny Bijou looked up and ignored the sea beasts. Instead, she looked at the huge rock Jiang Wang was hiding on. A whirlpool rotated in her left eye. She had obviously discovered Jiang Wang. "I didn't expect you to ambush me, too." In her voice, there was more joy than surprise. No, she wasn't surprised at all. From the moment she met the red-eyed horned frog, she had sensed that something was wrong. She realized that Jiang Wang was trying to ambush her. On the other hand, she had merely gone with the flow and beat them at their own game. She had enough confidence to kill Jiang Wang, so she calmly entered the game. At this moment, all the sea beasts under Jiang Wang's control froze on the spot, motionless. The soul concealment snakes inside the sea beasts were all wrapped up in a bubble, unable to move. But before Granny Bijou's voice had even died away, she had already pounced on the huge rock. She had already seen through his method of controlling the sea beasts and knew that she would be surrounded, so she was prepared. The whirlpool in her left eye is definitely her hidden means. It should have an effect similar to Li Longchuan's candle, tiny supernatural power. Jiang Wang holds the red makeup mirror in his hand and thinks quickly while calmly detonating his means. Bang! The thorny elephant sea beast, which was already under the control of Granny Bijou's small red fish, suddenly exploded when Granny Bijou flew over it. Pieces of flesh and blood splattered in all directions. A golden talisman then exploded and dense golden arrows shot wildly at Granny Bijou. Golden Arrow Talisman. A jade-green talisman ignited without wind. Anti-water talisman. It expelled all the water elements within a radius of 3 miles. A yellow talisman was torn apart from the middle by an invisible force. Mountain-carrying talisman. It made people feel as heavy as a mountain. Jiang Wang had chosen to hide in the thorny elephant's ear because the sea beast was extraordinarily large and had thick skin, making it a good hiding spot. Later, he realized that Granny Bijou's beast-taming skills were amazing, so he chose to hide on the huge rock for fear of being discovered. His soul concealment snakes were trapped by Granny Bijou, but did not affect him from detonating the talisman hidden in the thorny elephant's body. Granny Bijou was not flustered in the face of such a sudden talisman attack. She tapped her dragon-headed walking stick on the ground. An invisible ripple spread. This was to check for possible backup plans. She held up a small water tank with her left hand and tilted it slightly, and a mighty torrent instantly gushed out. It was as if she was carrying Jiang He with her. In the mighty torrent, there were colorful fishes crisscrossing and rushing toward the huge rock where Jiang Wang was hiding. The stars in the distant sky swayed and fell on her hunched body. She straightened her body at once. She did not look old, but she seemed to have endless strength. She strode forward, carrying mountains on her shoulders. As she moved forward, she casually waved her dragon-headed walking stick twice, and surging water danced around her body, blocking all the golden arrows. The sea beast's siege had failed, and the arrangement on the thorny elephant's body had failed. The first move that they had painstakingly waited for seemed to have no effect at all. Granny Bijou's colorful fishes had already rushed to the huge rock. Jiang Wang strode forward and slapped down, and a purple talisman with terrifying power flapped in his palm. Take my forbidden technique, 9 Heavens Thunder Talisman. Kaboom! A frightening power descended. In the sky, dark purple lightning surged like a giant python and swooped down toward Granny Bijou in a destructive manner. At first glance, the talisman's power seemed to be at the level of God's arrival. Granny Bijou did not even look at it. She only waved her dragon-headed walking stick. Insignificant skill. As the torrent surged, the frightening lightning dissipated easily. It was just an illusion created by the pearl of the Clam King. The vortex in the old woman's left eye spun faster and faster. She directly skipped over Jiang Wang in front of her and looked at the other side of the huge rock. Clearly, she had seen through the illusion of the pearl of the Clam King. The colorful fishes that were traveling with the torrent also sprinted toward the spot she was looking at. There were hundreds of colorful fishes. With long water lines, they all plunged down like daggers. Granny Bijou's attainment in illusion was astonishing. Not only could she easily see through the pearl of the Clam King that Master Ninja relied on to dominate the islands, she stepped through the air and used many techniques to deal with the ambush with ease. However, the illusion in front of them did not have the slightest flaw. If Jiang Wang did not see her real body behind the illusion through the red makeup mirror, he would have suffered a great loss because of his misjudgment. As the fishes in the sky charged toward her, a handsome young man with a determined gaze pulled out his sword and leaped up against the fishes. His sword was like the setting sun. It was fierce and fierce, pressing forward with indomitable will. Granny Bijou held her dragon-headed walking stick horizontally. Just as she was about to meet the attack, she suddenly turned her head. She felt the fluctuation of Tao energy. In the void, two pitch-black chains that resembled spiritual snakes drilled out and intertwined around her body. It was the secret technique of the legalist, the binding chains. It turned out that the sword-wielding Jiang Wang was also an illusion, but she could not see through it with her eyes. Granny Bijou saw through the pearl of the Clam King, but she could not see through the red makeup mirror. Jiang Wang, who relied on the illusion of the red makeup mirror to gain the upper hand again, directly broke through the stone slab that was blocking him. Under the high-speed movement, the invisibility cloak could no longer hide him. But he did not need to hide anymore. He pulled with his left hand, and the binding chains suddenly sped up. His right hand moved forward with the sword. The sword light was sharp and unrestrained. He was young and frivolous. His binding chains and sword all rushed toward Granny Bijou's illusion, as if he could not see through her real body. However, a rope with obscure brilliance had already quietly slithered toward the water droplet like a poisonous snake. It was the dragon imprisoning rope that he obtained from Hai Zoming. It was known as Bind Upon Touch. Chapter 884. Jiang Wang was not proficient in illusions, but with the help of the Clam King's pearl and the red makeup mirror, he was able to manipulate illusions to the extreme. The Clam King's pearl was one layer of illusion, and the red makeup mirror was another. How could his forceful wielding of the sword and summoning of the imprisoning chains not be another type of illusion? He used his actions to deceive Granny Bijou, thus giving the dragon imprisoning chains a chance to launch a sneak attack. The dragon imprisoning chains that were supposed to have a dragon's shadow were suppressed by Jiang Wang, and they were silent. Thud! There was the sound of water droplets shattering. The sound was supposed to be soft, but it was so clear now. The illusion of the old woman holding the dragon-headed staff suddenly collapsed and broke into many water droplets. These water droplets joined together and turned into a water rope, which collided with the dragon imprisoning chains. The dragon imprisoning chains were a rare treasure, provided that they could come into contact with the opponent. Obviously, it did not fool Granny Bijou's eyes. The water rope and the dragon imprisoning chains tangled together. The former was no match for the latter, but the latter lost its concealment. You can see through my illusion. The younger generation will surpass us in time. The water droplet shattered, revealing Granny Bijou's true body. She said that the younger generation will surpass us in time, but two small green fish leaped out of the glazed water jar at her left hand. The green fish swelled in the wind, each biting onto a chain and charging into the distance. The dragon-imprisoning chains tied them up tightly, but they had already left Granny Bijou's body. The old woman flipped her right hand, and the dragon-headed staff nimbly pointed out. The tail of the staff touched the tip of the sword. Just as the tail of the staff and the tip of the sword were in a stalemate, for green talismans lit up one after another under her feet. Jiang Wang had also set up a water-forbidding talisman on this huge rock. There were a total of 5 water-forbidding talismans in the squirrel box that Yin Fu gave him, and Jiang Wang had used all of them. He only had one goal, which was to seal off the water element and weaken Granny Bijou as much as possible. Granny Bijou's reaction was also very decisive. She turned her hand and flipped the entire glazed water jar over. Instantly, a raging tide, within 100 miles, a vast ocean suddenly appeared. The huge rock seemed to have become a reef, and under the huge rock was flowing water. To a certain extent, it had temporarily changed the rules of the bewildering world in this area. The water in this water tank was all collected by her and refined by her own hands. She had accumulated it for nearly 100 years, but now it was all used up in one day. Under the interference of the bewildering world's laws, they would quickly disperse. But at least at this moment, they had regained their geographical advantage. At this moment, the starlight in the sky swayed and fell onto the old woman's body. The water beneath her feet surged violently, but it was dark and gloomy. It was almost like the saying, "The sky is dark, the sea is dark, the north and west cannot be seen, and the east and the south cannot be distinguished." The 4 water prohibition talismans were almost useless in the face of such a huge amount of water. Jiang Wang was neither shocked nor flustered. His gaze was steady. 3,000 spirit snakes leaped out of the inner mansion and attacked Granny Bijou's Tong Tian Palace. This was the first time he had mobilized all of his spiritual energy since the strengthening of his heart tribulation. He had transformed into a spiritual snake to attack his opponent's Tong Tian Palace. Due to the protection provided by the Transcendent Palace to its host, it would make it difficult for the invaders to engage in a spiritual battle. Even someone as powerful as Zhuang Chengxian would be suppressed to a certain extent in his Heavenspan Palace. Although Jiang Wang's current spiritual energy was definitely stronger than most of the cultivators in the Outer Mansion. If he directly clashed with his spiritual energy, he would have a chance. But if he invaded the Tong Tian Palace, he might not succeed. However, he had only used all of his spiritual energy to fight for a chance. He did not hope to determine the outcome in one fell swoop. In Granny Bijou's Tong Tian Palace, the first thing Jiang Wang felt was a kind of stale smell. It was like an old house that had been in disrepair for a long time, leaking wind and rain everywhere. But the other party's spiritual energy was not weak. It had been accumulated over a long period of time. Almost as soon as the spiritual snake appeared, waves of water surged everywhere in the Tong Tian Palace. The turbulent water drowned the dense group of snakes. Jiang Wang's spiritual energy leaped out, holding the sword spirit of Xiangxi, and directly slashed the waves. Granny Bijou's Dao Vein True Spirit was a green python wrapped in waves. It watched this scene from afar, but did not immediately approach. Outside, the dragon-headed walking stick that was resisting the tip of Xiangxi's sword suddenly let out a roar. The dragon-headed walking stick instantly came to life and leaped into a hornless and clawed flood dragon. It bit the sword body and directly flew out with it. This force was so sudden that if Jiang Wang did not let go, he would be directly pulled open and expose a flaw. How could a sword user let go of the sword? Moreover, the spiritual energy in the Tong Tian Palace was fighting with the sword spirit. No matter what, he should not let go. After discovering the amazing strength of Jiang Wang's spiritual energy, Granny Bijou did not choose to fight head-on. She actually temporarily put aside the battle in the Tong Tian Palace, a crucial place, and chose to break the situation outside. With one blow, she put Jiang Wang in a dilemma, showing her shrewdness. At this time, Jiang Wang opened his 5 fingers and decisively let go of Xiang Si, allowing the sword spirit to entangle itself with the dragon-headed walking stick. He did not think it was a dilemma. He lost Xiang Si, and the old woman also lost the dragon-headed walking stick. His spiritual energy returned to his body, but there were still thousands of hidden snakes harassing the Tong Tian Palace. As soon as the sword left his hand, his 5 fingers closed and formed a fist, directly punching towards Granny Bijou. This was a direct punch to the face. A dignified master with unparalleled strength. Jiang Wang's fist was naturally far inferior to Wang Yiwu's fist. However, wrapped in vigorous Tao energy, it still had a mighty force that could not be ignored. At this moment, Granny Bijou had many choices. But with the starlight in the sky protecting her, why would she be afraid of the fist of a mere inner mansion cultivator? The strength of the inner mansion was in the divine ability, but it did not mean that the physical body was also strong. She had never heard of the true samadhi fire having the ability to temper the body. Moreover, as early as in the sea prison, she had already seen Jiang Wang's physical strength. At that time, even if Jiang Wang had hidden some of his strength, his true strength would not be much stronger. So in a flash, she chose to directly block with her palm. This was a capturing move, and the follow-up was fierce. She was about to use the force to remove Jiang Wang's arm. She thought that this was an experienced choice after weighing the pros and cons, but she did not know that this was also affected by the astray divine ability. The jade ring on Jiang Wang's right thumb was called icy jade. Its meaning was when water freezes, it becomes heavy. Its effect was that it could increase the user's physical strength by 10 times. It was unknown what the limit was, but at least with Jiang Wang's current physical strength, he was far from reaching the limit. Those who used bows and arrows needed more strength. Li Fengyao was using the icy jade to help draw the bow and the arrow was like a meteor stream. But a green light flashed. Jiang Wang directly punched Granny Bijou's palm with 10 times the strength of his fist. She tried to block and remove it, but she could not block it at all and was directly blasted open. Jiang Wang was famous for his samadhi true fire and his strong swordsmanship. Granny Bijou never expected that he would entrust victory to his fists. She forced Jiang Wang to abandon his sword, which was a wonderful move, but in turn, she lost a move. Jiang Wang blasted open the door with a punch without hesitation. He directly activated the secret treasure Chasing Wind, and his attack speed increased by 10%. The secret treasure star fire was opened. The totemic power poured in. The astral power poured in. His 5 fingers were already reaching Granny Bijou's face, and the samadhi true fire soared out. Chapter 885. Back at Camel Peak Mountain, Jiang Wang had used this true samadhi fire to burn Hai Zoming to ashes. At that time, he had Chongxian and Chu Liang to guide him in advance, and he also had sword-parting Holy Tower. But this time, he was the only one. His opponent was Granny Bijou, who was stronger than Hai Zoming. However, he still managed to create an opportunity to unleash his most powerful divine ability fire. The dragon-headed walking stick left with Sauvignon Blanc in its mouth. The distance between the two was extremely close. Under the acceleration of the wind-chasing secret treasure, Jiang Wang had almost reached out his hand when the true samadhi fire burned. Even with Granny Bijou's cultivation level, she couldn't avoid it. However, at such a crucial moment, her left eye that was spinning with a whirlpool suddenly jumped out. The whirlpool that helped her see through the illusion of the Mirage King's Pearl was not a secret technique, but the ability of this eye. After this, I jumped out of its socket. It spun and directly met Jiang Wang's true samadhi fire. At this moment, it was no longer a human eye. It was clearly a jade-green fish eye. The moment this jade-green fish eye collided with the true samadhi fire, an illusory bubble appeared above the fish eye. It was a middle-aged scholar with a gentle smile. He seemed to be unaware of his surroundings and only looked at Granny Bijou. His eyes were focused and even sincere. He bowed slightly and cupped his hands, as if he was greeting her. When the raging true samadhi fire rushed out, the bubble disappeared. But the domineering and scorching true samadhi fire disappeared all of a sudden. Upon closer inspection, it didn't disappear. Instead, all the true samadhi fire was gathered in that fish eye. In the jade-green fish eye, there was a red fire which looked very beautiful. Then in the next moment, the entire fish eye turned into ashes and the fire disappeared. No! Granny Bijou let out a shrill and sorrowful cry, as if her heart and lungs were being torn apart. Even when she fell into a trap and was punched open by Jiang Wang, she didn't have such a reaction when she was in a life and death crisis. But after escaping death, she looked so miserable. From a long time ago, Granny Bijou was Granny Bijou. Very few people knew her previous name. No one knew why she was called Bijou. She didn't live for herself. She lived for her jade left eye. The fish that came out of this I was called Baimu. This fish definitely wouldn't travel alone and would always travel in pairs. It was a rarely seen divine fish. There's a poem that says, "If I can succeed, why would I refuse to die? If I'm willing to be a mandarin duck, I won't envy immortals. If we succeed, we will live and die together." The middle-aged scholar that appeared in the bubble was her husband. In their early years, the two of them roamed the seas hand in hand, pondering Taoist techniques and cultivation, and seeing the sights of various places. They were very happy. During one of their expeditions, they obtained a pair of flounder eyes. One of them was used to observe the essence of things, while the other was used to create illusions. When the two of them were put together, they could be connected by life and death. Because she was an expert in illusions, she took the left eye while her husband took the right eye. At that time, it seemed like it was always sunny, and every day was so happy. Until the accident happened. She would always remember that day, and she would never want to recall that day. In order to save her, her husband had his eyes destroyed and died. His body and soul had been destroyed, leaving behind only a wisp of an illusion in his remaining eye. It was said that he missed her. She used this left eye to replace her own. It was as if her husband would always be with her. She alone carried the fate of two people, so she wanted to live, and she wanted to live better. Why did she fight for Zhu Suyao's chance to obtain the precious Heavenly Palace Secret Realms quota when her Tao heart was almost destroyed? It should be known that it wasn't easy for Fishing Sea Towers people to obtain Chi's quota. They had to pay a high price. She knew very well what love could do to a person. She knew that it wasn't that Zhu Suyao couldn't be cultivated, but that she loved the wrong person and was infatuated with the wrong person. Once she woke up, there was still a future. Why did she believe that Jiang Wang really wanted to save Zhu Biqiong and made such a huge bet? Because she believed in love. She knew that love existed in this world. But now, even her final attachment was gone. The last wisp of illusion that her husband left in the left eye saved her for the last time. This time, it was a true farewell. Therefore, she was in so much pain that she wished she was dead. The pain in her heart was far greater than the pain in her body. "Damn it! Damn it! You deserve to die!" she roared. But what greeted her was a ball of scorching light that almost blinded her remaining right eye. Before the white talisman representing the scorching light talisman burned out, another raging flood dragon talisman was torn apart. Roar! The ferocious flood dragon directly entangled Granny Bijou. Mountain suppressing talisman, black ice talisman, flame explosion talisman, blood scorching talisman. Granny Bijou was sad that she had lost her soul eye forever, but Jiang Wang didn't hesitate at all. Samadhi True Fire's attack missed, so he didn't hesitate to take out a stack of talismans and use them one by one. He was simply using primeval stones to crazily attack his opponent. These things were very expensive, but there was a possibility of repaying the debt if she was alive. The earth-shattering attacks instantly drowned Granny Bijou. For a moment, multicolored flames exploded and rumbled. The starlight that guided the distant starry sky couldn't block it at all. It didn't even last half a breath before it collapsed. "I want you to die," Granny Bijou's resentful voice could still be heard clearly amidst the chaotic bombardment. Sluggishness, heaviness, burning blood, stinging eyes, stiff limbs. Granny Bijou was still struggling to let out a shrill scream under the influence of countless spells. Whoosh! Something pierced through the turbulent flow of spells. Jiang Wang, who was retreating quickly, vaguely glanced at the colorful little fish, and an intense warning sign arose in his heart. The fish had already drilled in front of him and hit his abdomen with its head. The fish had 5 colors: red, black, yellow, green, and blue. Being kissed by the fish would definitely kill. At such a dangerous moment, Granny Bijou's first choice was to counterattack rather than protect herself. Crack! The 7 mysterious robe that Chung Gung Sheng relied on to protect himself was directly bitten open. The 5-colored fish hit another layer of golden light. That was the golden body talisman that Jiang Wang had torn apart earlier. Although the 5-colored fish immediately bit through the golden light, Jiang Wang had already reacted. He used his palm as a knife and chopped down on the fish's body. The 5-colored fish was only 3 fingers long and 2 fingers wide. It seemed like it could be pinched to death at any time. However, Jiang Wang's palm knife, which was infused with Tao essence, only sent it flying. Jiang Wang didn't chase after the 5-colored fish to tangle with it. Instead, he directly tore another golden body talisman and crashed into the ball of spell flames that had yet to dissipate. He punched the flustered Granny Bijou in the chest with a heart-shattering punch. Puff! At the same time that Granny Bijou vomited blood, Jiang Wang had already used his left hand to chop her throat, directly shattering it. He hooked his hand around her neck and raised his knee high, knocking her into the air. Xiao Chun pulled his hands apart and punched with his fists filled with Tao energy, launching a barrage of attacks. Granny Bijou's body, which had already lost control, floated in the air for a full 30 breaths. Her internal organs were shattered, and the 5 inner palaces of the Heavenly Palace were all broken. They had already lost contact with the Starlight's sacred tower in the distant sky during this process. Although the turbulent spell turbulence only left waves, it still shattered the golden light that protected Jiang Wang's body and almost tore the 7 mysterious robe into pieces. Jiang Wang completely endured the damage and didn't give Granny Bijou any time to catch her breath. Only then did he use his fists to beat her to death. Only then did the 5-colored fish shoot back from a distance. A bloody hand grabbed the glazed water jar and put it into the jar with a flip of the hand. If I succeed, why would I refuse to die? I'm willing to be a couple without envy. Lu Xiaolin's Chong, an ancient style. Chapter 886. As soon as Granny Bijou died, she lost control of her glazed water jar and fell down. Jiang Wang caught it and caught the 5-colored fish. She stopped directly on the corpse that no longer resembled a human. The 5-colored fish, which had lost its master and was covered over its head, was also a little confused. It scuttled around in the waterless, glazed water jar. The magical turbulence caused by the dozens of talismans being torn apart gradually dissipated. The surging torrent under his feet also scattered under the rules of the bewildering world. No one knew where it flowed to. Bewildering world, bewildering world. Life and death were all mysteries. For every life that appeared here, this world was cruel and merciless. Jiang Wang, who was covered in blood, stood in the air. His hands hung down, and blood kept dripping. In the bombardment, just now, he used all his strength to attack and didn't care about defense at all. His fists were dripping with blood, and his finger bones were even out. But he only felt carefree. Bijou deserved to die, no matter what sad past she had. No matter whether she really had feelings for Zhu Biqiong or not. It couldn't change the fact that she deserved to die. In the sea prison, before the stone door was moved, Jiang Wang's question was the last chance he gave her. If she really wanted to save Zhu Biqiong, everything could still be turned back. After that question, Jiang Wang had already decided to kill her. Her various performances on the Tianya stage made Jiang Wang's killing intent to the extreme. No matter how long it took, he would come to kill this old woman. But it was best to do it now. 100 punches could break 10,000 thoughts. Killing the thief who deserved to be killed with his own hands and washing away his hatred with blood, he deserved to be said to his heart's content. At this time, Chang Xiangxi rushed back with the dragon-headed cane. Chang Xiangxi, which had given birth to a sword spirit, was obviously stronger than the dragon-headed cane that had lost its master. Although it was taken away by the dragon-headed cane, it had already firmly gained the upper hand when it returned. It rushed in front of Jiang Wang and whistled as if it was presenting a treasure. Jiang Wang casually put his sword back into its sheath and grabbed the dragon-headed walking stick. The blood on his hand dripped onto the walking stick. Ignoring its struggle, he forcibly mobilized his Dao energy and cleaned the walking stick from head to toe. Then, he burned it with the divine soul flame flower and completely washed away Granny Bijou's divine soul brand. On the dragon's neck, the two characters Xing Si were carved, but he did not know what they meant. However, once he grasped the dragon head staff, he knew its function. This staff was a treasure used to tame beasts and was used to subdue beasts. The reason why Granny Bijou could easily counter the sea beasts controlled by Jiang Wang and control all kinds of fish was largely because of this treasure. With the power of his soul, Jiang Wang left his imprint on the staff. With a thought, he sensed the five-colored fish. Only now did he realize that the warning signs he had when facing the five-colored fish were not without reason. The fish was invulnerable, had tenacious vitality, was extremely fast, and had extremely sharp fangs. Jiang Wang had seen all of these before. The most terrifying thing was that its sharp fangs contained venom. It was extremely poisonous. It could be said that one would die after being kissed by the fish. However, because the venom sac was small, it had to rest for a month after killing a target. The five-colored fish was Granny Bijou's trump card. She would not use it easily. In the battle just now, she only released the five-colored fish to attack Jiang Wang at the most critical moment. Cheng Gung Sheng's 7 mysterious treasure robe was actually very precious. Back then, Wang Yiwu could not break it with the Inata-killing fist. The second punch could only avoid the treasure robe and choose to hit the head. But now, it was bitten by the five-colored fish and lost its spirituality. Then, it was torn to pieces in the chaos of many talismans. It could be said that this five-colored fish was Jiang Wang's biggest gain after killing Granny Bijou. However, he still needed to study how to raise this fish. In addition, the glazed water tank that contained the fish was also a treasure. After refining it and leaving his divine soul imprint, he realized that it was not a water tank. This treasure was called the Cloud Muffler, and it was a water bottle. Its value was in raising fish and storing water. It raised rare fish and stored essence water. Unfortunately, the water in the bottle had poured out, and the fish in the bottle had scattered. Only the five-colored fish was left. Other than that, there was no other gain. The most precious fish on Granny Bijou's body had been destroyed, and her storage box had been shattered in the chaos. At that time, Jiang Wang did not care and did not want to hold back. Moreover, under the circumstances at that time, if there was something that could be used, she would not have kept it. Presumably, there was nothing more precious than the Xingxi staff and the cloud muffler. There was no need to think about the unique cultivation method of the sea fishing tower. Even if she carried it with her, the sea fishing tower would naturally have ways to keep it a secret and not let outsiders learn it. Jiang Wang casually gathered some ordinary water and put it in the cloud muffler. He would make do with it for the time being. In the future, when he had time, he would find some companions with the five-colored fish. He shrunk the cloud muffler to the size of a fist and put it away. With living creatures like the five-colored fish in it, it was not good to put it in the storage box. There were very few living creatures that could survive in a space like the storage box. Jiang Wang did not want to risk the five-colored fish. He had already won the battle with Granny Bijou, and the sea beasts that had gathered earlier were still foolishly waiting outside. The water bubble had burst, and the divine soul snake had taken control of them again. Based on the principle of not wasting anything, Jiang Wang did not do anything to them. He just let them wander around freely. He washed himself slightly, took out a clean set of martial clothes from the storage box, and changed into them. Then, he went to the floating island alone. Killing Granny Bijou had taken too much time. He needed to recuperate on the floating island to avoid the disaster of mutation. The floating island in the Dingwei area was not small. It was about the same size as Summer Island. It floated in the air. When Jiang Wang flew over, he saw the side of the floating island because he was flying from a different direction. From afar, it looked like a big steam bun on its side. After adjusting his position, he was on the same level as the floating island. Only then could he see its appearance clearly. If it were not for the fact that it was not the sea below, it would look no different from an ordinary island. The biggest difference was that there were two tall, magnificent pillars on the floating island. They had a lotus base, and plum branches were carved on the pillars. The top of the stone pillars was carved with the legendary divine beast roaring at the sky. This divine beast had the habit of keeping watch. It often roared at the sky to convey the will of the heavens and the will of the people. The stone sculptures on the pillars also sat on the ground and looked at the sky, echoing the legend. There was no doubt that between the two pillars was the door to the floating island. Although the other places did not seem to be covered, Jiang Wang's intuition told him that it was best not to try rashly. Contrary to what he had imagined, there were no guards around Huabiao. Jiang Wang landed on the floating island, and no one came to interrogate him. Not far behind the pillars was a wide white stone plaza. Many cultivators were sitting cross-legged on it. Obviously, they were recuperating to avoid the danger of mutation. The moment Jiang Wang landed on the floating island, he felt the difference. The floating island seemed to be a world of its own. The mountains were high, the water was low, and the order was clear. It was completely different from the bewildering world. Being on it, it was as if he had returned to the modern world. Jiang Wang stopped for a moment. Seeing that no one paid him any attention, he did not say anything else and walked directly to the white stone plaza. When he walked over, someone happened to walk out from the white stone plaza. Probably seeing the confusion in Jiang Wang's expression, he said casually, "There are more than 1,000 warning arrays on the island. If the Sea Tribe came, they would have triggered the alarm long ago. It's not that we were careless." His eyes were long and slender, and he gave off a sly feeling. He talked nonstop. "Are you new?" Probably sensing that Jiang Wang did not have any signs of receiving people outside, he added, "Did you get separated from a group?" Chapter 887. All along, Jiang Wang had not been able to adapt to the enthusiasm of strangers. But after experiencing so many things, he was not at a loss. He only nodded and said, "I'm going to recuperate." "Huh, you have to hurry." The man with slender eyes hurriedly moved to the side to make way, very considerate. Jiang Wang did not say much. He found a place to sit cross-legged in the white stone plaza and began to adapt to the floating island's chi and recuperate. This process was not difficult, especially since Jiang Wang's fine control of Tao energy was far superior to cultivators of the same level. He only used 4 hours to recuperate the abnormal parts of his body. When he finally finished recuperating, he opened his eyes. Then, he saw that there was a person facing him. It was the man with slender eyes from before. This person had not left and had been waiting nearby. Jiang Wang's brows had just furrowed when this person smiled and said, "Brother, I see that you just came to Dingwei Floating Island and are not familiar with this place. So I thought that if you have any questions, I can help answer them. No matter what power you belong to, in the bewildering world, we are all fellow soldiers." He appeared to be very enthusiastic, but a bit too enthusiastic. As the saying goes, one who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. In the bewildering world, they were all fellow soldiers. If Jiang Wang had any questions, would he be afraid that others would ignore them and not help to answer them? In the bewildering world, all humans were fellow soldiers. This saying was naturally true, but helping each other on the battlefield did not mean that they had to be solicitous on the floating island. Fellow soldiers could not explain why he had waited for 4 hours and was eager to help. Thank you for your kindness, but I have no problems. Jiang Wang shook his head and said, little brother, don't be so guarded against people. It's quite hurtful. Fighting is not allowed on the floating island. What can I do to you? I really have good intentions. I'm afraid you won't understand. He patted his head and sighed. TCH, if you're really uneasy, ask some questions and understand the situation here. Give me a few bewildering crystals, and we can make a deal. Bewildering crystal? Jiang Wang didn't have the time to learn too much about the bewildering world, so he didn't know what a bewildering crystal was. The man with slender eyes sat down and grumbled in a very familiar manner. Look, how could you be so careless and come to the bewildering world without making any preparations? If you don't even know the basic resources here, how are you going to survive? Seeing Jiang Wang's impatient expression, he immediately explained, Confusion crystals are good stuff. The reason why our floating island can become a floating island is because we have enough confusion crystals. Only with enough bewildering crystals can we change the rules of the bewildering world within a certain range and make this place closer to the place where we humans live. The human race needs it to build the floating islands, and the sea race needs it to build their nests. In the bewildering world, this is the most solid currency. Jiang Wang asked casually, if it's also a currency, how do you exchange confusion crystals and Dao Yuan stones? It's just a small amount of money. No one is short of that. The man waved his hand in a magnanimous manner. Oh, right. My name is Chumi. I've been here for more than a year. Brother, how should I address you? My surname is Jiang, and my name is Wang. Jiang Wang asked, how much is a small amount of money? Chumi smiled. Bewildering crystals don't have a fixed size. It's based on weight. 1 or 2 bewildering crystals is equivalent to 100 yuan stones. It's nothing. This man's cultivation wasn't very high, but his tone was really arrogant. When he asked Jiang Wang how many bewildering crystals he wanted, it was equivalent to dozens of yuan stones. 1 yuan stone was equivalent to an A-grade meridian unlocking elixir, which was equivalent to an ordinary storage box. It was a price that an outer building realm cultivator could afford, but it would still be painful. If Jiang Wang had agreed to give it to him, he would probably be too embarrassed to go back on his word. Or maybe Chumi would trick him into signing a contract so that the deal couldn't be broken. It's nothing. Jiang Wang smiled and stood up. But I don't have a single bewildering crystal on me. Brother Chu, you're waiting for the wrong person. Look at what you're saying. Chumi immediately stood up with a face full of smiles. It's just a few questions. Will I really take your bewildering crystals? It's just a joke. He changed his tone. However, little brother Jiang, I'm afraid that you'll have to be careful. In the bewildering world, you can't not have bewildering crystals on you. You have to use whatever you buy. To put it bluntly, if you encounter a sea race that you can't defeat, you can throw away your bewildering crystals and buy some time to escape, right? I happen to know that there's a shop that exchanges bewildering crystals not far from here. The price is the most fair, and it doesn't cheat anyone. I'll take you there to take a look. Jiang Wang looked at him with a faint smile. Brother Chu, what do you think I have that can be exchanged for more bewildering crystals? How would I know? You have all the bewildering crystals on you. Chumi pretended to think. But, Brother Jiang, water element treasures are more popular in the bewildering world and can be exchanged for a higher price. After all, there are a lot of sea people in the bewildering world. Jiang Wang suddenly realized that Chumi was smelling the scent of Cloud Muzuin on him. He was wondering why Chumi was so enthusiastic. If he really went to that shop with Chumi, it was impossible for him not to be cheated repeatedly. I don't think it's necessary, Jiang Wang said. It's okay if you don't want to exchange. It's all voluntary. Chumi smiled indifferently. He looked around and moved closer mysteriously. I have a few treasures that are most suitable for a newcomer like you to use in the bewildering world. They can at least increase your survival rate by 50%. Brother Jiang, do you want to take a look? Good Lord, he had so many businesses. If one didn't work, he would have another one. As long as he talked to someone, there wouldn't be anything that didn't cost him money. However, He didn't force Chumi at all. He took the bait willingly. This was also the reason why Jiang Wang didn't immediately fall out with him. Although he didn't fall out with him, it was still quite annoying. At this moment, a burly man in a short jacket walked past. He glanced at them and smiled. Chumi, are you cheating people again? How can you say that? Chumi was very dissatisfied. It's a matter of mutual consent and mutual help. How can you say it's cheating? He patted Jiang Wang's arm. Don't pay attention to these gossips. They're just jealous. Brother, let's talk over here. The burly man shouted. Little brother, protect your storage box. That's all I have to say. After saying that, he laughed and walked away. He was also a wonderful person. Chumi spat at his back. You're such an annoying mouth. He turned around and looked at Jiang Wang with a smile. This friend of mine likes to joke. Isn't it quite interesting? Jiang Wang also looked at him with a smile. Brother Chu, are you from Liangshanglo? Liangshanglo was a small sect in the Qi domain. Its reputation wasn't very good, and they usually did things like stealing chickens and dogs. Just now, the strong man had specially reminded him to protect his storage box. In the entire Eastern domain, Liangshanglo was the only transcendent sect that had the reputation of being a thief. After all, stealing chickens and dogs wasn't something that could be done in public in the mortal world, let alone in the eyes of transcendent cultivators. It was just that this sect's cultivation method was unique, and there was no other way. When Su Qiyun was in the Forest Ocean Origin Realm, she had also pretended to be a member of Liangshanglo. Jiang Wang had some understanding of this sect. Chumi said that he had been in the bewildering world for more than a year. Although he was from Qi, it was normal that he hadn't heard of Jiang Wang's name. How could that be? Chumi's expression was a little unnatural. Since you're from Qi, you should know about the Beijunyan family, right? From the fact that he knew about Liangshanglo, it wasn't wrong to assume that he was from Qi. Of course. Jiang Wang nodded and asked curiously, Brother Chu, are you from the Yin family? That's not it. Chumi shook his head and whispered, I'm from Fufeng Commandery, and I don't know how far away Liangshanglo is. How could I be from there? Brother Jiang, please don't misunderstand me. When he saw that Jiang Wang seemed to know the Yin family very well, he immediately changed his tone. He was quite proficient in swindling others. Jiang Wang shook his head. His body had already completely recovered, and he didn't want to waste any more time. He cupped his hands and said, I still have some matters to attend to, so I'll take my leave first. Hey, don't be in such a hurry to leave. Chumi chased after him. You don't have to do business. It's good to make friends. The more friends you have, the more options you have. Don't you think so? Oh, right. As he hurried, he asked, Which group are you with? I'll take you to them. Lord Yulong. Jiang Wang didn't say anything else. He hung the blue medal at his waist and strode forward. When he arrived in front of Hua Biao, he turned around and saw that Chumi had already slipped away. Chapter 888. Regardless of whether Chumi was from Liangshanglu or not, judging from his behavior, he must be a swindler. He had stayed in the bewildering world for more than a year because he couldn't survive in Qi, or he was punished and sent here. He approached Jiang Wang as soon as they met. He must have taken a fancy to Yun Muzuan. At most, he was limited by the rules of the floating island, so he had a bottom line. The natural enemy of a guy like him was a blue metal constable. Not to mention Jiang Wang, who was a 4th grade blue metal constable, and Jiang Wang even used the name of Constable Yulong. The mouse had been tricked by the cat. That was why he ran faster than anyone else. In fact, if Jiang Wang had said that he didn't come with anyone but came to the bewildering world alone to wash his sins, he would have run faster. A blue metal constable had to have a witness and material evidence. Those criminals who came to the bewildering world to wash their sins weren't so particular. Chumi had been in the bewildering world for so long, so he knew very well who he could offend and who he couldn't. There were countless Taoist paths in the world, each with its own glory. The Taoist path, cultivated by a sect like Liangshanglu, was despicable, but it wasn't completely useless. Compared to Liang Shanglu, which was a sect that could not be seen in public, it was also related to the word steal. The stealing heaven manner was the stealing heaven thread. It was majestic. The thieving heaven manner was also a big sect that stood upright. It could be seen that the so-called Taoist path ultimately depended on how the cultivator grasped it. He wondered how Su Qiyun's search for materials for Xiaoyu was going. Thinking of the stealing heaven mansion, he couldn't help but have such a thought, but it was just a flash. Jiang Wang left the floating island and flew far away. He didn't even familiarize himself with the most important place in the bewildering world for the human race. He hurriedly found a place, adjusted his body's condition, and left in a hurry. Time waited for no one. In order to kill Granny Bijou and completely solve the problem, he had already spent more than 3 days. He didn't know how long Zhu Biqiong could last on the Tianya stage. Xingxi's dragon head staff had the ability to control beasts. In addition, Jiang Wang used a spirit to hide the snake and take over the magpie's nest. He directly controlled 100 sea beasts to explore in all directions. He didn't control more sea beasts because he wanted to preserve his spirit's combat power, and it was useless to control more sea beasts. These sea beasts were enough to surround and kill him. If they were deployed properly, he might even kill him. But what Jiang Wang needed to kill was the commander level's commander. Sea beasts couldn't play a role in this level of battle. The reason he controlled the sea beasts was to expand his field of vision and help him search for the commander-level sea tribe members. With 100 sea beasts spread out, it was already enough to cover the area that he could reach in time. Level of the bewilder hand was the human races. Among human cultivators, if one did not consider the upper and lower limits of the seed of the ability, it would be fixed at a standard of ordinary strength. Then it could be said that the first level was slightly weaker than the first level, the second level was stronger than the first level, and the third level was stronger than the second level. The cultivator with the first level was stronger than the cultivator with the second level, and the cultivator with the third level was stronger than the cultivator with the first level. In other words, the cultivators with the outer level might not be stronger than the cultivators with the inner level. It still depended on how many divine powers they picked and how many sacred towers they set up. As for the more specific situation, it depended on the mastery of the divine powers and the potential of the divine powers. These weren't data that could be materialized. As long as one picked a divine power, they would be on the same level as the outer level. Therefore, if they really had to be divided, the combat power of the outer level could be divided into 9 levels. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3, Level 2, Level 4, 1 divine power, Level 4, 3. Of course, no one would divide it like this. The more divine powers one had, the rarer it was. The heavenly abode was rare. Level 9, outer level, 5 divine powers, and Level 4 were also very rare. Moreover, the divine powers themselves had too many variables and couldn't be a constant standard. It wasn't impossible to develop a powerful divine power to the extreme and violently beat 2 or 3 divine powers. People were still used to seeing Level 4, outer Level 4, as the peak of the outer level. This was because they had indeed set up all the sacred towers and completed the construction of the outer level. However, the upper and lower limits of the outer level were indeed very different. However, the commander-level sea race was divided into 4 levels internally: low level, middle level, high level, and top level. The actual soldiers and generals were also divided in this way. Low-level commander-level sea race members roughly corresponded to ordinary outer-level cultivators of Level 1 to Level 2, or to an outer-level cultivator of Level 1 with 1 divine power. Middle-level commander-level sea race members roughly corresponded to ordinary outer-level cultivators of Level 3 to Level 4, or to an outer Level 2 with 2 divine powers. High-level commander-level sea race members roughly corresponded to Level 4 with 1 divine power, or to Level 4 with 2 divine power. Top-level commander-level sea race members roughly corresponded to cultivators of Level 4 with 3 divine powers and above. These sea race members all had the bearing of a king and had the possibility of becoming a sea race king. From this perspective, It was easier for human transcendent cultivators to ascend compared to the sea race. This was because under the efforts of the human race's sages, human transcendent cultivators had already broken the shackles of outer level without divine power. Ordinary outer level cultivators could also become deities. In the vast sea, only top-level commander-level sea race members could become kings. However, top-level commander-level sea race members were mostly born with powerful bloodlines. It was very difficult for them to break through later on. However, this so-called correspondence of strength between the human race and the sea race could only be used as a rough reference. The combat strength systems of the human race and the sea race were originally different, so it was very difficult to accurately correspond them one by one. The seniors thought of ways to correspond them, but it was only so that the younger cultivators wouldn't be like mantises trying to stop a chariot and courting death. They could choose their opponents as clear-headed as possible. At the very least, Jiang Wang was very clear-headed about himself now. His two divine powers were both considered powerful. It was no problem for him to deal with low-level commander-level sea race members. He might even be able to challenge middle-level commander-level sea race members. If he encountered high-level commander-level sea race members, he would just have to think of a way to escape. A muscular sea race member in a black robe walked in the air while holding a spear in one hand. The spear was made from the bones of an unknown sea beast. It was white and very sharp. The sea race's normal state was actually similar to the water race's. They were also in human form. Only certain parts of their body had the characteristics of the sea race, such as armor, scales, horns, and so on. After revealing the Sea Lord's original form, there would be a completely different change until they were close to the beast form. When the sea race's ancestors created the Sea Lord's original form, they had referred to the ferocious sea beasts that once ran rampant in the vast sea. Of course, now that most of the sea beasts had been tamed, the sea race was unquestionably the ruler of the vast sea. Not far in front of the black-robed sea race member was a single-horned four-finned fish. It looked at him from afar, seemingly eager to fight. Why are there so many sea beasts? The sea race member's voice was low. He suddenly stretched his empty left hand forward, and many water ropes appeared out of thin air, tightly binding the single-horned four-finned fish. No matter how it struggled, it couldn't break free. It looked simple and unadorned. If he opened it now, he would see that the ink-colored word sea had turned into Wu. This was a separate scroll linked to the sea and border list. It had long been set to only record the killing of sea race members above the commander level. Before he fell into the bewildering world, he had already tied it to him. The sea and border list was a list that the human race hung in the bewildering world. It was very powerful and was an important tool of the country. However, in the bewildering world, it was mostly used to record achievements. Every time a human cultivator killed a sea race member, it would be recorded on the sea and border list. And the achievements obtained from killing a sea race member could be exchanged for resources on the various floating islands of the human race. Dao essence stones, bewildering crystals, magic tools, cultivation methods. The various clans would use the accumulated achievements to distribute the common benefits obtained in the bewildering world. Of course, the vast majority of cultivators would choose to go to the floating islands of Sea Fishing Pavilion, Juming Island, and Mog Valley to exchange. After all, these three clans were the strongest in the coastal waters and had the richest inventories. Moreover, they had the demeanor of a large sect and were fair and impartial. There were also some sects and influences that had their own unique resources that could attract cultivators to exchange for them. The earliest appearance of the sea and border list could be traced back to the middle of the late ancient era. However, after so many years of inheritance, it had been destroyed several times and was no longer the same as it was in the beginning. In short, the sea and border list had witnessed the countless years of war between the human race and the sea race. After putting away the spear tip, Jiang Wang did not stop. He directly rushed to another place. The sea beasts he controlled had discovered new commander-level sea race members. In just half a day, he had already killed 5 commander-level sea race members. This efficiency could not be considered slow. But for Jiang Wang, it was still not enough. The number of commander-level sea race members he wanted to kill was 100. If he could only kill 10 a day, he would have to kill for 10 days. Could Zhu Biqiong, whose cultivation had been completely destroyed, still last that long? He stepped on the blue cloud imprint and rushed forward. Soon, he arrived at the target location and hid himself with the help of the stealth cloak. As before, he controlled the sea beast to attract the enemy's attention. The red mystic mirror would suddenly attack, and the Clam King's Pearl would strengthen the illusion's power. The target had no choice but to face the attack. Jiang Wang jumped out and directly shook out a gray rope, touching the target. A dragon's roar resounded. The dragon imprisoning rope directly tied the target into a ball. Jiang Wang did not say anything. He held the everlasting yearning rope vertically and directly pierced through the enemy's head. Sharp sword chi immediately minced the target's body. Jiang Wang casually searched around. Not finding anything good, he turned around and left. 10 steps, 1 kill, once done. In terms of killing a single target, the dragon imprisoning rope might not be as useful as the 8 notes burning the sea. The 8 notes burning the sea was an instant cast Dao technique engraved in the second inner residence. It was more convenient. It had the ability to kill on its own and did not require an additional sword strike. But the dragon imprisoning rope had an advantage that the 8 notes burning the sea could not compare to. It almost did not consume Dao energy. After all, the 8 nodes burning the sea was an A-grade high-grade Dao technique. Even if Jiang Wang's Dao energy was vigorous, he could not use it without restraint. In a prolonged battle, it was obviously more suitable to use the dragon imprisoning rope as the first attack. Jiang Wang silently weighed his options and rushed to the next location. He continued to ambush and attack. He was constantly summarizing his experience and constantly revising his attack plan. He strived to determine the most efficient and successful attack plan. He also tried to rush to the destination and attack directly. However, the opponents were commander-level sea race members after all. They had strong vitality and relied on the Sea Lord's true form. It was very difficult to kill them instantly. The ambush seemed to take some time, but it saved a lot of time and energy. In general, it definitely increased his efficiency. In this kind of continuous battle, he gradually found the feeling of a lone assassin who could kill with one strike. It was no wonder that the King of Hell was so powerful. After spending so many years with only killing his opponent as his goal, he must have honed his own unique and most effective way of killing. Even a powerhouse of similar strength might not be a match for him. Take Jiang Wang himself, for example. He could be considered a veteran of hundreds of battles and had killed countless people. However, not every battle had the goal of killing the opponent. Relatively speaking, his grasp of the slim chance of life and death was not as accurate as that of the King of Hell, who constantly walked the line between life and death. He needed to be more accurate, faster, and use less energy. During the entire process of hunting, Jiang Wang constantly raised his own requirements. At the same time, he also drove the sea beasts to further and more dangerous wilderness. It was only in those places that he could meet powerful sea race members. The red-eyed horned frog leaped into the air. Evil creature. In front of it was a pitch-black fish with long and thin scales. On the fish's head was a protruding bone chair. On the bone chair sat a skinny, pointy-faced sea race member with no eyebrows. Although this bone chair was formed from the bones of the big fish, it was obviously cultivated by the sea race. Otherwise, it would be impossible to evolve a bone chair on its head. This was meaningless to survival. Therefore, this long-scaled black-boned fish should be a specially cultivated mount. Being able to cultivate mounts on a large scale was a symbol of stability in itself. It could also be seen that this skinny sea race member had an extraordinary background. Unlike the red-eyed horned frog's original owner, the bald sea race member, who still needed to hang a wrought tan chair between the red-eyed horned frog's horns. However, when the pointy-faced sea race member shouted angrily. The red-eyed horned frog that was pouncing toward him froze in midair. The next moment, countless spikes condensed from blood broke out of its body. The blood in the red-eyed horned frog's body pierced it from the inside out, turning it into a hedgehog. It couldn't be more dead. Obviously, this pointy-faced sea race member had an innate ability related to controlling blood. In the distance, Jiang Wang didn't say anything. He directly dissipated his divine soul concealment snake and rode the remaining sea beasts away. His goal was to kill 100 commander-level sea race members as soon as possible to wash away his sins, not to challenge strong enemies and temper himself. Due to the rules, his opponents had to be within the commander level, but the weaker, the better. However, this guy riding the long-scale black-boned fish was at least a mid-level commander-level sea race member. Therefore, Jiang Wang didn't hesitate. He didn't even withdraw the divine soul power that was controlling the red-eyed horned frog. He directly turned and left. These 100 sea beasts were the eyes he had sent out, and they were also the warning line he had prepared for himself. If he met the weak, he would kill them. If he met the strong, he would leave. 2-in-1, no update. I wish everyone a happy Christmas Eve. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.